Chapter 554. Alas, I should have thought that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world, let alone in the immortal dreamland that follows the basic principle of equivalent exchange. This moonless enthusiasm has obviously exceeded the necessary limit. I thought she would assign us some more difficult tasks, and we can also take this opportunity to hone our actual combat experience. Unexpectedly, she actually took drastic measures. In a beautifully decorated bedroom, Wang Lu helplessly shrugged his shoulders. Before visiting Moonless, Wang Lu never thought that the plot would escalate to this point. Before he could get any information from Moonless, he was forcibly detained by the other party as a member of the harem. Not long ago, when Moonless domineeringly proposed to take Wang Lu and Lu Li into the harem, Wang Lu thought that she was joking. Her original intention was to keep the two of them for dinner. After all, for a person who only had one breast left to have such an interest, she was definitely a perverted traitor. But soon, Moonless laughed and left. Then, the black-clad maids solemnly prepared the bedroom and related necessities for the two of them in Moon Capital. They also specially wrote a warm reminder, stating several issues that needed to be paid attention to when getting along with Lady Moonless, including the bedtime schedule, skill requirements, and so on. It dazzled and made people deeply admire her. Then, Wang Lu realized that Moonless was serious. Moonless was indeed a high-level bureaucrat of the Temple of Heaven. Things that seemed licentious and tyrannical to others were taken for granted by her. It made people have to sigh with emotion that this was the role model of a bureaucrat. No matter when, she always maintained a strong possessive desire, which was in sharp contrast to Aya, that good-for-nothing. After sighing with emotion, it was time to think about countermeasures. The harem was not suitable to stay for a long time. Although the harem route was undoubtedly a shortcut to get magical treasures and methods, but with Wang Lu's identity and vision, how could he want to be a *** for others? Not to mention that Moonless was just a deity stage. Even if she was a true immortal descending to the mortal world, Wang Lu would still consider how to find an opportunity to kill her and then pick up the loot. However, even if he wanted to escape, he had to find the right time. Although he looked down on the collection of a deity stage, he had to admit that he was still far from being able to confront a deity stage head-on. If he angered Moonless, he might not even be able to escape. Therefore, just now, when Moonless domineeringly took him and Lu Li into the harem, Wang Lu didn't confront it head-on. Instead, he agreed for the time being and slowly plotted. With the remaining props in the mustard seed bag, as long as he figured out the structure of Moon Capital's formation, he was sure that he could find a flaw and escape when Moonless was not paying attention. Now, all he had to do was wait for the right time. While thinking about it, Wang Lu flipped through the warm tips provided by the black-clothed maid, trying to find any flaws in Moonless that he could exploit. However, when he flipped to the end, he could not help but be shocked. What is this? Harem list? Looking at the pages filled with names, Wang Lu was shocked. When he flipped them over, it was another full page. Adding the two pages together, the number of people in the harem was over 100. No wonder it was written in the warm tips that the time to serve was about once a month. He initially thought that Moonless' demand was not that strong, but it turned out that she couldn't even get a shift. Wait a minute, there were more than 100 harem beauties, but they were arranged once a month. Does she need 3 or 4 people to accompany her every day? What kind of explosive waist strength is this? While he was sighing with emotion, the bedroom door was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and 4 or 5 female cultivators with different appearances came in. The one in the lead looked arrogant and domineering as she walked into the room. She glanced around and then focused her eyes on Wang Lu and Lu Li. Are you guys the newcomers? In just one sentence, Wang Lu had roughly guessed the identity of these people, his new colleagues. They were also the old drivers in the harem. Wang Lu secretly sensed them with his primordial spirit and found that they were just a group of king pill stage dregs. Thus, he casually cupped his hands toward them as a courtesy, but what he got in return was a sneer. The woman in the lead narrowed her slender eyes and chuckled. Previously, I heard the servants say that the 2 new sisters are not from the Temple of Heaven, so they don't know the rules very well. Originally, I blamed the servants for speaking without knowing the immensity of heaven and earth, but I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes. It's simply unbelievable. How could such barbaric and unruly people like you be qualified to serve the lady in Moon Capital? Lady Harmonious Heaven manages the Palace of Heaven and the surrounding 3 mountains and 15 cities, so her mission and responsibility are great. If she is in a bad mood because of the 2 of you not serving her well, then you too will die. Therefore, I think you too should first learn the basic etiquette with the servants for a few months, which is also considered as Big Sister's consideration for you. While speaking, the several followers around the woman had come forward, grabbed the arms of Wang Lu and Lu Li, and were about to drag them out. This set of business process was too familiar to them. Basically, every newcomer had to go through such a process. After receiving a show of strength, only then could they honestly stay dormant in the harem. Moonless vision was quite high. In recent years, the people who entered the harem were all talented and unruly people. Thus, it was the mission of the old drivers in the harem to break the lofty and unyielding character of these people, so that those who once had self-respect would shamelessly roll under Moonless feet. Of course, in addition to serving Lady Moonless, they would more or less have some selfishness. After all, every new harem beauty was a direct competitor. For these female cultivators who regarded the harem as their heaven, Moonless' favor was everything. However, her favor was, after all, limited. If there was one more person, the others would inevitably get less. When the old drivers were ready to make their move, Lu Li looked at Wang Lu at a loss, not knowing whether she should resist or not. However, Wang Lu frowned and began to quickly sort out his thoughts. The current scene, no matter how he looked at it, was like a scene in a harem fight. 2 humble but kind-hearted mistresses were pushed aside by the narrow-minded main harem. And according to the orthodox way of development, after the 2 of them experienced torture, they finally moved a certain valley hero in the harem with their pure and kind quality. On one hand, the hero saved their lives, and on the other hand, taught them the way to survive in the harem. Finally, the hero died miserably in the hands of the main harem for various reasons, and the 2 heroines who inherited the will of the valley hero began their long journey of revenge. Such a script was completely predictable. After all, from the point of view of the harem route alone, relying on the advantage of outsiders to get treasures from Moonless was too easy, and this was impossible to conform to the principle of equivalent exchange in the immortal dreamland. Therefore, the harem route was bound to face all kinds of difficulties, and the harem fight must be one of the main lines. If this route was unfolded, it could be imagined that there would be this and that kind of tragic story. At least, Wang Lu had come up with 7 or 8 interesting routes, but he was not interested in putting them into practice. If it was before his transmigration, he might still be in the mood to play with these cold and empty women who could only be visited once a month, such as setting off a trend of raising dogs in the harem. But now he was in a hurry, so he preferred to fight rather than fight in the harem. Previously, he was worried that the road of fighting in the immortal dreamland was forcibly interrupted by Moonless into a harem fight route, but as a result, this group of people actually came to his door and forced him to change the route back. A group of people who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth came to provoke him. If he didn't make a move, it would be a waste of his hard work. With his current strength, it was unrealistic to contend with Moonless, but in Moon Capital, apart from Moonless, even if it was Moonless' strongest assistants who were in the middle level of Yuanying stage, Wang Lu was confident that he could forcibly fight them. As for the group of waste wood in the harem, it was not a problem. In his view, it was simply experience points that were delivered to his door. The only thing he needed to take into account was Moonless' own reaction. But as soon as she left, this group of B*cheese followed her in. If there was no connection, it was probably because Moonless was also observing his reaction. Then, I'll give you a good show to watch. Anyway, even if Moonless herself personally came down, Wang Lu also had a unique skill to save his life. After thinking about all this, Wang Lu no longer hesitated. With a roar, a trace of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi was condensed in his hand from the king pill, and then he punched the woman next to him. Although the other party was also a king pill cultivator, how could she be compared with Wang Lu? who was a king pill cultivator. In a blink of an eye, her nose was smashed by the fist wrapped in primal chaos sword chi. The woman on the other side was stunned, and then her jaw was broken by the same punch, and her broken teeth fell to the ground. The two were, after all, king pill level Taoist masters, but they were disfigured in just one encounter. The woman who was the leader was stunned, and her heart was surging with stormy waves. The strength of Wang Lu's cultivation was still secondary. He dared to make a move in the harem of Moon Capital. This was the problem that made her view of the world waver. Moonless' temperament was strict and almost violent. She was extremely strict with her subordinates. If there was a little mistake, even if there was a flaw in the clothes, she would be severely punished, not to mention openly violating the ban in the harem and fighting. This was simply courting death. Who the hell were these two newcomers? She thought that they were the new favorite concubines of Master Moonless. One was a middle-grade king pill, and the other was a peak shudan. Unexpectedly, the other party was so fearless. How dare you wantonly commit murder in Moon Capital? Don't you want to live anymore? The woman calmed her mind and asked in a stern voice. At the same time, she quietly took out a yin and yang heart protection mirror. It was a high-grade magic treasure that Moonless had given her after a sexual intercourse. Wang Lu's two punches just now had shattered the facial bones of the two king pill cultivators, and their protective chi seemed to have disappeared. She saw this, and all the hair on her body stood up. However, the next moment, Wang Lu punched her again, and the speed was so fast that it made her heart palpitate. She was at the peak of Jindan stage, but in front of this punch, she was as fragile as a piece of paper. The spells of the 5 elements that once made her famous were all thrown out of the sky. She could only hope that the yin-yang heart protection mirror could save her life. Bang! After a muffled sound, the woman flew out, and her body hit the wall of the corridor outside the bedroom. A mouthful of blood spurted out more than 10 feet away. Ha! Wang Lu slowly retracted his fist, and at the same time, he took a long breath. The joy in his heart was indescribable. Chapter 555. The news that a riot broke out in the harem of Moon Capital shocked many people. Under the coercion of Moonless' harmonious sky, the tens of millions of people in the entire palace of heaven were trembling with fear. As for Moonless' harmonious sky, there was no need to mention the Moon Capital, where the cold and oppressive atmosphere had damaged the mental state of many cultivators who had just arrived. However, the riot did break out. The harem guards who heard the news had gathered 50 people in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, but when they arrived at the scene was already unbearable to look at. There were more than 10 harem concubines lying on the ground. Most of them were injured by iron fists. There were very clear fist marks on their faces, and then they were unconscious. There was a river of nosebleeds on the ground, and there were even a few strands of gray mucus that looked like brain juice. It was really a tragic sight. At the same time, there were 7 or 8 people shivering around the foot of the wall, including the harem concubines and maids. The murderer who caused all this was standing in the middle of the river of blood, wiping his fists with the bedsheets in the bedroom, with a satisfied look on his face. It's really refreshing. Although they are just a group of small fries, I feel that my experience value has increased by more than 2 bars. Wang Lu put down his bloodshot and hot fists and sighed with relief. A harem concubine said with a trembling voice, Do you know what you are doing? How dare you act violently in Moon Capital, you will never be reincarnated. Wang Lu glanced at her and said, I have always respected family planning. The concubine did not hear what Wang Lu said at all. When Wang Lu turned his eyes, she was so scared that she screamed, Guards, take her down. No, kill her. She has been contaminated by the chaotic creatures of the lower realm. The captain of the guards, Han Yu, sighed at that time. This group of harem beauties, they didn't have any other skills, but their ability to stir up trouble was imprinted in their bones. They were scared to the point that their skirts were wet, and they weren't clear-headed, but they were able to talk about using someone else to do their dirty work. It was truly admirable. This yelling concubine was taken into the harem by Lady Moonless 5 years ago. At that time, she was a famous wandering monk in Wuxia. When she first entered the King Pill, she was in high spirits. Who knew that after 5 years, she had become crafty and mean, and the immortal spirit she once had was lost. And Han Yu had seen too many such people. Most of the hundreds of harem members had gone through the same path. At the beginning, Han Yu was very confused. Why did the wise and powerful Lady Moonless let her harem degenerate to this extent? But later, she gradually understood. Especially when she happened to see Moonless showing an incomparably cold gaze to her own empress, Han Yu realized that perhaps this was the scene that Moonless wanted. Moonless had never really been moved by the imperial concubines in the harem. Even her possessiveness was not sincere. What she needed was a large harem to support her bureaucratic scene. But she was not interested in the management of the harem at all, so she referred to the most orthodox harem model: let the concubines diligently fight among themselves and quarrel with each other, while Moonless herself looked on coldly as if watching a play. And over the years, the performance of the actors on the stage had become more and more outstanding. Han Yu felt that the group of people headed by the main concubine Xiao Yun, was exactly the same as the harem concubines in novels. Unfortunately, there was one more actor on the stage today who did not perform according to the script. Looking at the nosebleed, Han Yu felt very complicated. On the one hand, she sincerely admired this person's courage, and at the same time, she couldn't help but feel happy. Most of those who were knocked unconscious on the ground were usually arrogant and disrespectful to the guards. But on the other hand, because of her duty, she couldn't let that person act violently. Han Yu didn't have the courage to directly kill the other party, because she wasn't sure whether this person should be killed or not. Not long ago, Lady Moonless had personally taken these two people into the harem. Who knew what she was thinking? So it was better to find a way to trap them first, and then let Lady Moonless deal with them. As for whether she could take them down or not. Hey, if a dignified Taoist master of Yuanying stage couldn't even take down a middle-grade King Pill, then she didn't need to work in Moon Capital. Thinking of this, Han Yu clenched the short cane in her hand and took a step forward. Suddenly, the whole bedroom turned upside down, and the scene had been replaced by a vast grassland. At the same time, the dark clouds were densely covering the earth, so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Only the thunder from time to time brought a little light. After a while, heavy rain poured down, as if the sky was broken and the Milky Way was leaking. Bathed in this cold rainstorm, Wang Lu couldn't distinguish the authenticity of the rain. Original magical ability? It had been a long time since Wang Lu used this skill to change the sky in an instant. Because recently, Wang Lu's fights were all short and quick, and the outcome was basically decided within a few moves. Whether it was him or his opponent, neither of them would resort to their original magical ability, this kind of big killer weapon. Although the power of original magical ability was strong, it was essentially a means to delay the rhythm, and the consumption was huge, so no one was willing to use it easily. Unexpectedly, this Yuanying stage cultivator, who was the captain of the guards, was so decisive that she used her original magical ability right away. Moreover, judging from the scene of the grassland rainstorm, the power of this original magical ability was quite good. Wang Lu didn't know that Han Yu actually wanted to control the situation and delay time, waiting for Lady Moonless to arrive. He was thinking, could it be that the captain of the guards could see that he had a lot of hidden cards? If so, the strength evaluation of the captain of the guards should be raised by a few levels. Powerful cultivation base was not terrible, but powerful cultivation base and shrewd and careful, that was very terrible. In this moment of hesitation, the rainstorm became heavier and heavier. Luli, who was next to him, could not help but take 2 steps closer. The girl who was still in peak shoot on stage could not withstand the pressure of a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, especially since she was good at offense and bad at defense. Before the King Pill stage was formed to protect her body, she almost had no resistance in front of a Yuanying stage cultivator. Wang Lu looked at Luli, took her into his arms, and then propped up his non-phase sword defense. In the dark rainy night, the golden sword defense was like the center of the world, dazzling. However, the person who raised the rainstorm was always hidden in the dark. With the cultivation base of Yuanying stage, against a Jindan and a Shudan, he did not hesitate to use the stealth backstab method. This was no longer using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken, but rather using a holy sword to kill a chicken. Wang Lu was silent in the rainstorm for a while, and then he let out a long breath. His golden core operated, and the original magical ability that was hidden in the deepest part of the golden core was launched. The King Pill level original magical ability could not directly contend against Yuanying stage cultivator. Therefore, the red light in the sky above the grassland flickered twice and then fell silent. In the end, the sky did not change. However, soon, a bloody wind blew across the grassland, and the surrounding grass solidified and hardened under the blowing of the bloody wind. The weeds were like sharp swords, rising straight to the sky. Han Yu, who was hiding in the grass, was aghast. She had seen a lot of original magical abilities, but the King Pill level original magical ability that could exist independently in the Yuanying stage level original magical ability was extremely rare. In particular, when the other party's bloody wind blew, the whole grassland seemed to no longer belong to her. In particular, she saw with her own eyes that in just a few breaths of time, the weeds beside her extended, solidified, and finally, under the nourishment of the rain, turned into an emerald green sword with a rich metallic luster. Even her breathing stopped for a moment. The next moment, the sharp sword flashed and stabbed toward her. Although the grass sword was crushed by the Yuanying stage cultivator's protective aura shield the moment it left the ground, this scene still shocked Han Yu. What kind of magical ability was this? It could actually corrode her original magical ability? The original magical ability could only be covered by a more powerful and higher level magical ability. Just now, the brief change of color in the sky meant that although the other party's original magical ability was strong, it was still not the opponent of Yuanying stage cultivator. However, the subsequent corrosion and assimilation of the grassland meant that the level of the other party's magical ability was extremely high. She could not wait any longer. Han Yu decided to end the battle quickly. At this moment, she felt that there were hidden dangers everywhere around her, and her torrential rain could do nothing to the other party's golden sword defense. She could not win by relying on the magical ability alone, so Han Yu had to do it herself. With a thought, her body melted in the torrential rain, and in the blink of an eye, she got rid of the threat of the grassland sword forest and approached Wang Lu. However, when she got closer, she found that the golden sword defense seemed to have no flaws at all. Unless she used the power of Yuanying stage to forcibly suppress it, there was no way to break it. Then she would use force to suppress it. Han Yu whistled, and the torrential rain became even more violent. After a moment, the sound of rolling tides came from afar, and the grassland actually set off a storm. The huge waves that were hundreds of feet high came pressing like a mountain, really overwhelming. This was Han Yu's understanding of water. Ever since she was cultivating in the deep mountains, she saw with her own eyes that the torrential rain broke down a mountain, and the floodwaters rolled down the gravel, sweeping away everything along the way. She then condensed this original magical ability. When she pushed her magical power to the extreme, she could crush everything with the pressure of the water. Wang Lu softly snorted. Regarding this storm, he did not want to fight it head-on. Using his middle-level King Pill cultivation base to compete with a Daoist master of Yuanying stage in terms of magical power was simply courting death. Luli, give me a hand. Luli didn't speak, but she already held the skybreaker in her hand. Her whole magical power was condensed on the sword, waiting for Wang Lu's order to release the strongest blow in her current stage. Although she often seemed to have lost her mind, after entering the fighting state, Lu Li's keen intuition could guide her to make the correct response in the first place. Seeing this situation, Wang Lu immediately changed his original plan. Instead, based on his intuition, he reached out to hold Lu Li's hand that held the sword. Primal Chaos heaven-splitting sword chi brewed for a moment and then poured into the skybreaker through the place where the two of them held each other. Suddenly, this immortal sword burst out an unprecedented terrifying fluctuation. The sword wave swept across, and thousands of cracks appeared on the ground within the radius of 300 meters. And this was just the aftermath that was subconsciously released. With the cooperation of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi and the Skybreaker as the foundation, and then through Lu Li's brilliant sword heart, Wang Lu already felt that his primordial spirit had the tendency to collapse under the resonance. This was not a power that could be controlled by the King Pill stage. Wang Lu didn't dare to wait any longer. He immediately joined hands with Lu Li to send out this sword strike with all his strength. The Skybreaker drew a gray line in front of the huge wave that ran through the heaven and earth. At that moment, the heaven and earth stagnated. The roaring wave was blocked by an invisible force for a moment, and time seemed to have stopped. Then, the giant wave split to the left and right, revealing a bottomless canyon in the middle. The flood that Han Yu tried her best to summon was divided into two parts along the gray line. Han Yu flew above the flood and inconceivably watched as the flood that could no longer be closed roared past both sides of Wang Lu's non-phase sword defense. The next moment, a mouthful of blood overflowed from her mouth. As a Taoist master of Yuanying stage, Han Yu's original magical ability had been broken by that sword strike, and she was injured by the backlash. However, the power of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi was still not seen the bottom. After a while, even the ground disintegrated, opening up a bottomless crack. The clouds in the sky were unprecedentedly turbulent, and in the darkness, a line of light appeared. Although the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi broke out in a flash, its power has penetrated the entire space, causing continuous damage. More and more blood flowed out of Han Yu's mouth. No matter how hard she tried, she could not stop the disintegration of her original magical ability. Finally, the rainy night in the prairie turned into countless fragments. Han Yu staggered a bit and then fell to the ground. However, Wang Lu was not happy at all. Just now, although that sword strike gave him an unprecedented experience, which benefited him and Lu Li endlessly, it also created an unprecedentedly powerful enemy. After Han Yu fell to the ground, in the middle of the room, Moonless has stood in front of her. This Taoist master of deity stage had a faint smile on her face, but from time to time, her shaking right hand showed her anger at the scene before her. "Do you have anything to say?" Moonless smilingly asked Wang Lu. Wang Lu had no doubt that her hidden subtext was for him to say his last words. No matter how much Moonless valued him before, this scene was a slap in her face, and a political figure could not allow her face to be dirty. However, Wang Lu was already prepared for this scene. He smiled and said to Moonless, "Your harem needs to be reformed. The original harem fighting system can only cultivate waste that is not commensurate with your reputation, just like those lying at my feet." Wang Lu said with a nasal voice of disdain, and then said, "You started your career with military exploits, but your harem has even forgotten the basic fighting skills. Such a harem is empty, but it's laughable." So? Moonless declined to comment on this. "So, after thinking about it, I decided to offer you a strategy." Moonless kicked a fainted concubine at her feet. "Is this the strategy you offered?" Wang Lu said, "Yes, this is part of the strategy. Because from now on, I want the harem to be like a battlefield, where strength is respected. Every 5 years, a harem competition will be held in Moon Capital, and the winner will be the harem master for 5 years. In this way, the survival of the fittest can cultivate a harem worthy of your name." Harem competition? Moonless narrowed her eyes and began to seriously consider this unheard of creativity. There had never been such a harem in heavenly earth, but it was undeniably very interesting. In particular, it seemed fun to let her concubines fight each other for the throne of the harem master. Very good. In the end, Moonless nodded and said, "Since you have this idea, then do it for me." Chapter 556. Senior brother, do you really want to hold a tournament? In the bedroom, Lu Li sat on the bed and curiously asked. Her eyes were full of eagerness to try. Wang Lu said, "Of course, it's a good opportunity. Although there are many waste wood in Moonless Harem, there are also many experts. The main concubine Xiao Yun, is a Yuanying stage expert. On paper, her strength is stronger than that of the guard captain, Han Yu. Unfortunately, after so many years of fighting in the harem, their brains have become stupid. They may not even be able to use 20 to 30% of their ability. Now give them a chance to adjust their state. 5 days later, when the tournament begins, we will have endless experience. Good. Lu couldn't help but begin to stroke her own sword, Skybreaker. Although most of the people in the harem had higher cultivation base than her, Lu still had a strong desire to fight. She could not wait to fight with everyone, including Wang Lu himself. It was good to take risks and have fun with Wang Lu, but it would be even better if she could have the opportunity to consolidate her cultivation base and refine her sword intent. For Wang Lu, things had to be a bit more complicated. From the beginning, Wang Lu's actions were not simple. The adoption of the whimsical proposal of the harem tournament was not based on luck. According to Moonless Temper, it was almost impossible for her to tolerate others' offense, let alone fighting with the concubines in the harem of Moon Capital, and even injuring the guard captain. Let alone Li Yan's friend who wrote the recommendation letter. Even if Li Yan herself was here, Moonless would still be ruthless in order to maintain her dignity. Of course, the idea of the harem tournament was indeed good, but the one who came up with this idea, Wang Lu, at most, deserved to die a quick death. He didn't need to be thrown into the dark side of the moon to be tortured before his death. What really made Moonless hold back was the sword strike that broke Han Yu's original magical ability by Wang Lu. With the combined power of Wang Lu and Lu Li, and then perfectly guided by Skybreaker, the power of that sword strike was enough to make most of the Daoist masters of Yuanying stage palpitate. Of course, it was far from being a threat to a soul formation cultivator. If that sword was aimed at Moonless, she wouldn't even need to use a magic treasure. She could block that sword with her physical body alone. However, the point of Wang Lu's sword attack was not to injure the enemy, but to demonstrate a problem. How could a king pill cultivator make such a sword attack? Although there were many king pill cultivators in the world, to be able to slash out such an earth-shattering sword was probably unheard of by many. This kind of king pill could not be a nameless person. The backer behind him was very likely to be terrifying, so Moonless would not take the risk to provoke him. Harmonious Heaven, the 7th rank of the 9 heavens of Temple of Heaven, was indeed powerful, but compared with a person who could cultivate such a powerful king pill, Harmonious Heaven still seemed insignificant. Moonless was arrogant, brutal, and headstrong. However, as a political figure, she had absolutely qualified political acumen. In the Palace of Heaven, she was like a vassal king, so there was no room for her to go further. Therefore, she used all her acumen on how to keep her current position. Whether it was the sky-covering Moon Capital, the extravagance of the wine pool and the forest of meat, or even the huge debauchery and tyrannical harem, they were all means for her to show her ambition to others. Only those who did not move forward would be extravagant, and those who had far-reaching plans would often pretend to be a moral saint. Thus, in the Palace of Heaven, her goal was naturally just a vassal king, and she would not ask for more. At the same time, she would never offend people that she shouldn't offend. It was this complex political motive that made Moonless finally tolerate Wang Lu's rudeness, and even appointed him to complete the preparation for the harem tournament. In the next few days, presumably, Moonless would exhaust her resources to dig out the details of Wang Lu and Lu Li. Of course, it was impossible for her to get any result. However, because she couldn't get the result, she would be afraid to act rashly. With the wisdom of Moonless, she would eventually find that Wang Lu and Lu Li had no backing in the heavenly earth. However, no one knew how long it would take. At least, it was enough for Wang Lu to use this time to use the resources in Moonless' hands to ruthlessly gain a lot of experience. For the current Wang Lu and Lu Li, there was nothing more suitable than a hardy tournament. Most of the opponents were between King Pill stage and Yuanying stage, which was exactly the level that the two of them needed to deal with seriously. They even had to take some risks, but not to the extent that they couldn't deal with it. Moreover, according to the rules of Moonless, life and death in the tournament was up to fate, so they could unscrupulously kill each other. The life and death battle was unusual. After each battle, the benefit was more than 10 times that of an ordinary battle. Of course, the premise was that they didn't suffer irrecoverable serious damage in the battle. It could be said that it was a way of cultivation where risk and benefit coexisted. Only such a growth rate could satisfy the needs of Wang Lu and Lu Li. The Moon Capital Harem tournament kicked off on time 5 days later. The venue was located in the middle of Moon Capital, on the training field belonging to Moonless. Under the careful planning of Wang Lu, although it was only 5 days, the opening ceremony still presented a series of wonderful programs, dazzling and too much for the eyes to take in. The Moon Capital guards around the training field all stared intently. Although the rules of duty did not allow them to make any response, their focused posture still exposed their true thoughts. At the top of the center of the audience, even the always scheming and unsmiling imperial concubine Xiao Yun revealed a smile from time to time. While pointing at the programs and actors on the training field, she talked to Moonless. She was talking, and Moonless was listening. From beginning to end, Moonless didn't say a word. When the opening ceremony ended, the first round of the tournament soon began. The actors who were still gorgeously dressed on the training field immediately put on their uniforms and waited for the start of their turn with a solemn look. Even the imperial concubine came down from the stage and put on a light and gorgeous fighting suit. Thus, in the entire audience, except for a few bureaucrats who were deeply trusted by Moonless and Moonless herself, there was no one else. Then, in the first match, I will fight against Xiao Murong. In the middle of the training field, Wang Lu, who was both the host and the contestant of the first match, said with a smile. At the same time, a woman with a face full of anger came to the stage and looked at Wang Lu. Her eyes seemed as if they were about to spit fire. Xiao Murong was the imperial concubine who was mistaken by Wang Lu as the imperial concubine 5 days ago and then punched out 10 feet of blood. At that time, she took several of her men to find trouble for Wang Lu and Lu Li. That was also the rule of the elders in the harem to train the newcomers. Who knew that this newcomer completely didn't know what the rules were? With 3 punches, the prestige that Xiao Murong had painstakingly built up in the harem for many years was gone. Those who had seen her nosebleed violently and fall unconscious would no longer have any respect for her. Even her previous backer, concubine Xiao Yun, would no longer see her. Thus, Xiao Murong could no longer find a place in the harem, unless she could defeat this opponent in the martial arts arena and wash away her shame. She had no way out. 5 days was not enough for her to completely recover the spirit, energy, and spirit of the Temple of Heaven ascetic nun before she entered the harem, but she still had the confidence to defeat her opponent. Because in Wang Lu's hand was the sword of Mount Kuan, not the Skybreaker. And in Xiao Murong's hand was the spirit sword, Faceless Moon, that she borrowed from imperial concubine Xiao Yun. Without the Skybreaker, she didn't believe that a mere middle-rank King Pill could make an earth-shattering sword strike. And she, as the peak of King Pill, with the help of Faceless Moon, dared to compete with a Daoist master of Yuanying stage. Under such circumstances, she had a chance of winning. In fact, after the start of the battle, Xiao Murong indeed grasped the initiative on the scene for a time. The more than 1 meter long sword, Faceless Moon, was like a dexterous dagger in her hand. Combined with the yin and yang heart protection mirror, it made the martial arts arena constantly change day and night. The flying sword sometimes appeared in her hand, and sometimes it was used by her to attack the enemy from a distance. Sometimes the sword light was as fine as a crescent moon, and sometimes it was as round and flawless as a full moon. Xiao Murong had almost recovered more than 90% of her peak strength. The speed of her sword momentum was dazzling, and it seemed that the newcomer was completely suppressed. But it didn't take long for people to find that no matter how Xiao Murong changed, the golden sword defense did not budge. The long-haired woman in the middle of the sword defense, which was the image that Wang Lu now used to show people, almost yawned. Xiao Murong's face was red, and she felt deeply ashamed. So she stopped the flashy sword momentum and began to concentrate her strength on one point. Faceless Moon was a spirit sword. If the difference in sword spirit was not taken into account, its grade was actually higher than that of the sword of Mount Kuan. Driven by Xiao Murong with all her strength, the body of the sword was flowing with the most refined and pure moonlight, as if it wanted to make the real moon feel ashamed. The next moment, just as the sword momentum was about to be fully charged, Xiao Murong suddenly broke out, trying to catch her opponent off guard. In her opinion, the reason that Wang Lu was able to keep his sword defense from being broken under the previous intensive offensive was more or less due to his prediction. So, as long as she could break the opponent's prediction, she could break the opponent's sword defense. Xiao Murong's sword moved up, ensuring that every bit of strength she had was squeezed into Faceless Moon. The spirit sword flew up in an instant, and she also flew up in an instant. The opponent on the martial arts arena rapidly expanded in her field of vision, and she looked like she was still caught off guard. Victory seemed to be at her fingertips. Then Xiao Murong felt a tremendous force explode from the sword in her hand, then surged along her arm and spread all over her body. Her body, which had been tempered thousands of times during the King Pill realm, seemed extremely fragile under the pressure of the tremendous force. Her bones broke one by one, and her muscles were twisted into a ball. At the last moment before her consciousness disappeared, she vaguely saw her brain burst out. And the audience present was extremely shocked to see such a scene. Xiao Murong attacked with all her strength, and her momentum was like a rainbow. Then the spirit sword collided with the golden sword defense. With a muffled bang, the sword defense trembled slightly, but Xiao Murong turned into a mass of minced meat. Phew, it looks like I won. After putting away the sword of Mount Kuan, Wang Lu waved to the silent surroundings, and then walked down the martial arts arena under the increasingly solemn gaze of Moonless. When he stepped down from the arena, he clenched his fists, which was a small celebration. This was the first time that he combined the counterattack sword momentum of non-phase sword with primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi in actual combat. While rebounding the opponent's attack, he also added his own strength. Therefore, at that moment, Xiao Murong and the others simultaneously suffered a full blow from the peak of the King Pill realm, plus Wang Lu's heaven-splitting sword chi. Even if she had 10 yin and yang heart protection mirrors, she would not be able to save her life. And such an achievement could only be quickly condensed in a life-and-death battle. It was unknown how long it would take to truly perfect this move by relying on closed-door cultivation and primordial spirit deduction. Wang Lu looked up at the harem concubines who were watching the match from the contestant seats, but what he saw was a mass of fat and plentiful experience points. Chapter 557. On the first day of the tournament, there were a total of 6 rounds of matches. 6 winners were decided, but at the same time, 6 corpses were left behind. The death rate of the losers reached an astonishing 100%, which was far beyond the expectations of many people. Before this, people thought that although the competition was a matter of life and death, everyone was sisters. Even if they had been fighting in the harem for so many years, there was still friendship between them, so they would not kill each other. But the reality was that the friendship in the harem could not be taken seriously at all. Those good sisters, who usually smiled on the surface, were more efficient than anyone else when it came to killing each other in the martial arts arena. Before the fight, the two would still talk about trivial matters and recall the good times they had spent together. They even agreed to taste the cooking of Moon Capital's chefs after the competition. But in the blink of an eye, the mask of goodwill was torn off, and the life of the other party was taken away in an unprecedented cruel way. Then, they looked at the corpse on the ground with a vengeful gaze and lamented how she deserved it. What's more, they exposed all kinds of dark secrets of the harem in public, as if they could finally vent out their pent-up frustrations for many years. The cruelty and indifference of these harem concubines shocked the bureaucrats under Moonless. Even Moonless herself frowned deeply, and her killing intent gradually condensed. She was deeply disappointed with the beauties in her harem, not disappointed with their ignorance of the general interest. In fact, for so many years, the principle of Moonless management of the harem was to let those cultivators, who used to be independent, become deaf and blind in the cramped harem cage, and eventually become ignorant. Not understanding the general interest was not actually wrong, but the mistake was that they could no longer please their master. Moonless sat on the high throne and watched the 6 matches with cold eyes. Except for the first match between Wang Lu and Xiao Murong, where the combination of Nanfei's nameless sword and primal chaos sword chi made her eyes light up, the remaining 5 matches seemed boring. With her vision as a deity-stage Taoist master, the matches of several king pill level were not worth mentioning at all. What she wanted was something else. She wanted to know how the concubines, who had been kept as pets by her for decades, would perform in the martial arts arena. She was looking forward to all kinds of complex human nature blooming on that vast but narrow stage. But in the end, all she saw was disappointment. The inexplicable hatred and the complaints of gratitude and grudges made her feel deeply bored. The competition on the second day was still the same. The concubines fought in the ugliest way possible. Under the test of life and death, they exposed their darkest side. On this day, the number of people in the auditorium had been reduced by half, and Moonless' face was covered with frost from beginning to end, causing the concubines in the martial arts arena to keep quiet out of fear. It was not until the beginning of the 5th match, when the girl named Luli stepped onto the stage, that Moonless showed a bit of interest. Luli had yet to pass the king pill tribulation. Although everything was ready, right now, she was still in peak shoot on stage, and her opponent was the right-hand woman of the main concubine Xiao Yun, the genius cultivator of the former Jade Cold Pool, Qi Qiunying. King Pill's cultivation level was at the peak, and she had a natal artifact that she had personally refined, the solidifying jade bottle. There were 3 rivers and 5 seas in the bottle, the accumulation of Qi Qiunying's 100 years of cultivation. In terms of fighting ability, Qi Qiunying could be ranked in the top 5 in the entire harem of Moon Capital. For Luli, drawing such an opponent seemed to be extremely disadvantageous. However, she looked very excited. There was not the slightest fear in her eyes, and the corner of her mouth was even slightly raised, revealing a clear smile. Qi Qiunying just sneered at this. During this period of time, she had heard people say that among the 2 newcomers, the taller one was shrewd and treacherous. Moreover, her strength was superior, far from being measured in terms of cultivation level. However, the more plump one was a pure fool. Apart from eating, she only giggled. Tisk, she's still giggling. Does she really think that she, a mere Shudan, is qualified to survive in the tournament? What a joke. Thinking of this, Qi Qiunying's heart gradually became hostile and murderous. She had no enmity with Luli, but in the previous 10 rounds of competition, the result of the 10 corpses had made her tacitly agree that the rule of this harem tournament was death. Moreover, from her point of view, it was perfectly justified to kill a baby-faced girl, a newcomer who was likely to threaten her harem status. Therefore, when the tournament officially began, she immediately turned the solidifying jade bottle, and the waves of the 3 rivers and 5 seas surged out from the mouth of the bottle. The momentum of the waves was not inferior to Han Yu's original magical ability. For a Shudan cultivator, once caught in the flood, it would be a dead end. Luli's offense was strong, but her defense was weak. If she was really trapped in the endless flood, it would indeed be difficult for her to get out. However, the keen intuition given to her by brilliant Sword Heart allowed her to intuit this from the beginning. When the mouth of Qi Qiunying's solidifying jade bottle had just tilted down, 12 flying swords flew out from Luli's sleeve and went straight to the mouth of the solidifying jade bottle, as if to destroy the mouth of the bottle with sharp sword momentum, so that the flood would be smothered in the bottle. Qi Qiunying inwardly praised her cleverness, and then inwardly laughed at her for being a fool. The cleverness was that the other party could see that the biggest problem of the solidifying jade bottle was the mouth of the bottle. The fool was that as the owner of the solidifying jade bottle, how could she not know this defect? The most vulnerable place had already been laid out by her with the most powerful trap, and the other party's flying swords were precisely the same as walking right into the trap. Although Lu Li's most powerful sword, the Skybreaker, was still in her hand, these 12 flying swords were obviously not ordinary. They must be her important magical treasure. Thus, she would first collect these 12 swords, and then slowly deal with her. Qi Qiunying slightly withdrew her hand from the bottom of the bottle, and immediately, a powerful suction force gushed out from the mouth of the bottle. The 12 flying swords lost control in mid-air, cut off their connection with their master, and were shakily sucked into the bottle. Qi Qiunying smiled and felt the abundant spiritual power in the solidifying jade bottle. The next moment, her smile froze. The energy in the bottle soared, and in a split second, it broke through the safety threshold of the solidifying jade bottle. She tried to release the seal on the mouth of the bottle, but it was too late. The solidifying jade bottle exploded in front of her eyes, and the water of the 3 rivers and 5 seas burst out, instantly drowning her. Qi Qiunying didn't even have the time to feel the pain of her palm being crushed, nor did she have the time to suppress the shattered jade mansion with her primordial spirit. She only felt that she was like a duckweed under a huge wave, and then in the torrential flood, a primal chaos sword light came at her face, taking away her last wisp of consciousness. Outside the training field, the main concubine Xiao Yun, suddenly got up and looked at the training field in disbelief. In her line of sight, Luli was stepping on the flying sword in her hand, avoiding the violent eruption of the flood. The training field of Moon Capital had been purified by a Daoist Master of Deity stage, so the space was very malleable. From the outside, it seemed to be only 300 meters square, but the actual space inside could accommodate a mountain range. However, at this time, most of it was submerged by the flood. Luli floated above the ocean, giggled, and then waved her slender hand. Suddenly, a simple and unadorned sword drilled out of the water and came to her side. It was Lu Li's Skybreaker. Concubine Xiao Yun immediately took a closer look and suddenly found out that the flying sword under Lu Li's foot was not Skybreaker, but just a gale sword. With the strength of Concubine Xiao Yun's Yuanying stage primordial spirit, she immediately began to recall every scene that she saw just now. Thus, she soon found out that just now, at the critical moment when Qi Qiunying released the 3 rivers water and collected the flying sword, Lu Li, with her brilliant sword heart's magical ability, changed the position of Skybreaker and the gale sword. What a cunning little girl. Concubine Xiao Yun glared at her and gnashed her teeth. With Lu Li's peak Shudan stage strength, coupled with brilliant sword heart's full control of Skybreaker, she could indeed bring great trouble to Qi Qiunying, and was even hopeful to seriously injure her. However, the jade condensation bottle was indeed worthy to be the magical treasure of a peak Daoist master of King Pill. Once the 3 rivers and 5 seas came out, Qi Qiunying could completely survive in the water and could not be killed. On the other hand, Lu Li couldn't stand the consumption of a protracted fight. In a full frontal confrontation, as long as her sword couldn't kill the opponent, Lu Li would be defeated without a doubt. In fact, before the fight, Concubine Xiao Yun had told Qi Qiunying to use her advantage in cultivation base to deal with the opponent, so that she would have a 10% chance of winning. However, unexpectedly, the other party completely saw through their calculation and used an exceptionally treacherous little trick to directly kill Qi Qiunying, so that the opponent's magical ability could not be used. It was indeed a good calculation. If they fought with cultivation base, no matter how strong Skybreaker was, its power would still be limited by its master's strength. Qi Qiunying could completely deal with it, but Qi Qiunying accidentally fell into the trap and put her Skybreaker into the jade condensation bottle. The jade condensation bottle, which had barely reached the level of spiritual treasure and had yet to give birth to its spirit, actually had to contain the 3 rivers and 5 seas as well as an ancient immortal sword? Let alone in an unguarded situation. Qi Qiunying thought that the 12 flying swords that came in were magical treasure level, so the jade condensation bottle was more than enough. However, unexpectedly, there was actually an immortal sword hidden inside. How could the jade condensation bottle bear it? Naturally, it instantly burst. Whether it was Concubine Xiao Yun or Qi Qiunying, they both thought that this would be a one-sided fight. Whether it was cultivation base or wisdom, Qi Qiunying was far above the opponent. However, unexpectedly, they correctly estimated the cultivation base, but miscalculated the IQ. You hit it well, little girl. But the tournament has just begun, so we will meet again. Concubine Xiao Yun coldly said to Lu Li, I hope at that time, your little cleverness can still save your life. With that, Concubine Xiao Yun turned around and left, not even saying goodbye to Moonless. Moderately presumptuous was her privilege as the Empress, but Moonless didn't care. Her eyes were still on Lu Li. Just now, that decisive sword strike had aroused her great interest, especially that skybreaker. However, Lu Li didn't realize that her immortal sword had aroused the interest of a Daoist master of deity stage. She was still immersed in great joy. The girl turned her head to look at Wang Lu outside the arena and loudly shouted, "Senior sister. Just now, she praised me as smart." Hee, Lu Li is also praised as smart. Wang Lu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Smart? Perhaps. That last-minute sword strike was indeed smart, but it had nothing to do with IQ. What really played a role was Lu Li's intuition that was keener than a beast. Under the brilliant sword heart, the girl would not miss any opportunity. Even if she herself was unaware of that opportunity, her subconscious reaction would be to cut her throat. In fact, this was the real terrifying part of the brilliant sword heart. Compared to the all-conquering attack power, the key was the intuition that could bring this attack power to the limit. With such judgment, even if Lu Li was only in peak Shudan stage, she would still be able to succeed in every endeavor in this harem tournament. However, the real test was still behind. Judging from the reaction of Moonless, perhaps this farce of a harem tournament would not end well. It was time to consider when to withdraw. Chapter 558. Starting from the third day of the tournament, the atmosphere finally cooled down. There were no more scenes of shrews fighting each other, and the casualty rate also plummeted. Both sides went all out, perfectly displaying the spirit of competition, and won the applause of the audience. As for Moonless, her expression was still indifferent, but it was no longer overcast, which made many people greatly relieved. However, Wang Lu knew that the calmer Moonless was, the less time was left for him. As the organizer of the tournament, so far, all the situations were in his plan, including the bloody and violent scene of the previous 2 days, as well as Moonless' initial anger, were all in his careful plan. However, now the situation had gradually begun to get out of his control. The purpose of Wang Lu's tournament was straightforward, to borrow Moonless harem members to give himself some experience, and then wait for the opportunity to run away. Although these harem members lacked actual combat experience, and they had been fighting in the harem for many years, most of them were, after all, monks of the Temple of Heaven. Their basic skills were quite solid, and their magical treasures and props were also endless. Even if such an opponent was not a strong enemy, it was also not a weakling. However, there must be a suitable excuse to brush other people's harem. No matter how ruthless Moonless was to her harem, she would not let others slaughter her. Therefore, Wang Lu designed a life and death tournament. At the same time, in order to guide Moonless' mood, he also deliberately designed the scene of the previous 2 days. On the surface, he designed the tournament to determine the opponent by drawing lots, but through under-the-table manipulation, he arranged the people who had grudges against each other as his opponents. Especially in the first few groups, their hatred was absolutely irreconcilable. Then, as the contestant in the first group, he crushed his opponent into minced meat in an extremely ruthless way, which directly brought the bloody atmosphere to the arena. Then, even if it was inertia, it would make the contestants behind him kill each other. This kind of inferior fighting scene was deliberately done by Wang Lu, and as expected, Moonless was deeply dissatisfied with it. Thus, in the midst of Moonless' dissatisfaction, the 2 fights between Wang Lu and Lu Li stood out and decisively won the interest of Moonless. Wang Lu's original intention was to let Moonless' interest support her to continue to watch, and as long as Moonless was interested in the fight between Wang Lu and Lu Li, they could safely continue to fight in the arena until the harem concubines were either killed or injured. At that time, Wang Lu and Lu Li, who had gained enough experience, could also prepare to withdraw. But now, this step had to be brought forward. His and Lu Li's performance did arouse the interest of Moonless, but Moonless' interest was obviously beyond expectation. Especially when she looked at the immortal sword Skybreaker, the greed in her eyes became more and more obvious. Wang Lu knew that he seemed to have underestimated the greed of Moonless as a vassal king. He thought that with the previous sword strike that he and Lu Li launched together, with his own non-phase method and primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi, he could create a great enough backing to make Moonless hesitate to take action. However, unexpectedly, the king of Palace of Heaven was already on the verge of being blinded by greed. Aside from being a political figure, Moonless was also a cultivator, a powerful cultivator that could be counted on one's fingers in the heavenly earth. Although she was not a sword cultivator in the strict sense, the Skybreaker had a supreme attraction to any cultivator. Wang Lu believed that when she witnessed Lu Li defeating Qi Qiuming with the power of the Skybreaker, the greed in her heart became more and more uncontrollable. That being the case, Wang Lu had to speed up the process. On the one hand, he revised the match list, so that the viewing value of the tournament skyrocketed, in an attempt to distract Moonless' attention. On the other hand, "Thank you for letting me win." Wang Lu cupped his hands toward the woman who knelt on one knee in front of him and then floated down the arena. With Primal Chaos Heaven-splitting Sword Chi as the main attack and non-phase Sword Defense as the main defense, Wang Lu used 113 moves to defeat a low-level Yuanying stage concubine. And in order to win, the other party even burned a lot of her innate vitality. This fight could be called the most wonderful fight since the beginning of the tournament. Wang Lu fought a Yuanying stage cultivator with the King Pill. Although the process was more daunting than dangerous, it was not easy. Therefore, the harvest was unprecedentedly rich. He clearly felt that his primordial spirit was more condensed, his jade mansion more stable, and the King Pill shone brightly with vitality. Just this fight alone was better than a month of closed-door training. However, the problem was that, according to this momentum, Wang Lu's next opponent would be the main concubine Xiao Yun. This was, of course, the result of the black box operation. Otherwise, concubine Xiao Yun should have met Lu Li in the next round. However, Wang Lu forced her to be in front of him. Concubine Xiao Yun, of course, also guessed that Wang Lu was behind this operation, but she didn't care. Whether it was Wang Lu or Lu Li, in her opinion, it was all the same. The two of them were in the same group, so whoever they taught a lesson to was the same. And no matter who it was, she had enough confidence that she could win. Concubine Xiao Yun was different from the other concubines in the harem. She was Moonless' legal spouse, no doubt the mistress of the harem. She was of noble birth, and her strength was far more powerful than her peers. Even Moonless himself was not her opponent in the same stage. Moonless opening a harem in Moon Capital was also the result of concubine Xiao Yun's acquiescence. If not, even with Moonless' overbearing attitude, he wouldn't be able to open a harem. Concubine Xiao Yun has seen the strength of Wang Lu and Lu Li very clearly. If they were in the same stage, she was far from their opponent. However, she was now a middle-level Yuanying stage cultivator, with more than 100 years of cultivation, and full of magical treasures. Even the martial arts arena in Moon Capital was personally built by her. The time, place, and people were all on her side, so what if Wang Lu was strong? In view of this, please allow me to go out and purchase some props and equipment for combat preparation. In the inner hall of Moon Capital, Wang Lu submitted an application to Moonless to go out. Moonless was lying on the throne of Moon Capital. The red eye of the skull face carefully looked at Wang Lu, and then sneered. What a lame reason. Do you think I will give you the opportunity to escape? Wang Lu avoided Moonless' question and insisted on his own opinion. Although the inventory in Moon Capital is rich, the props that I need are not here. Moonless sneered. What do you need? Just give me the list, and I will have someone to purchase it for you. In the Palace of Heaven, there is nothing that I can't buy. Wang Lu said, the authority of Moonless Harmonious Heaven is supreme in the Palace of Heaven, and I have a deep understanding of this. However, the Palace of Heaven is not just your own Palace of Heaven. As the Empress, concubine Xiao Yun's authority is second only to you. I'm worried that my list would fall into her hands not long after it is sent out. If so, my card would be exposed to concubine Xiao Yun in advance, which would be too disadvantageous for me. Oh, you have a sharp tongue. Moonless still sneered. Then try to overcome the disadvantageous conditions to fight. You are a sword cultivator, so you should have the willpower to overcome all difficulties. Wang Lu said, so I am now trying to overcome your obstruction and fight for a chance to win for myself. I know that you are worried that I will run away, so I will leave a hostage in Moon Capital. My junior sister Lu Li will stay here. If I don't return, she will be at your disposal. What a joke. Aren't the two of you at my disposal now? Wang Lu still avoided the threat of Moonless and continued his own topic. Moreover, if I can win, it will also be a great advantage for you, won't it? Moon Capital doesn't need two masters, and the harem doesn't need an empress with weak authority. Unfortunately, there are some things that are not easy for you to do, but in the arena of life and death, everything is possible. All you have to do is to give me a chance. Moonless suddenly opened his right eye. Very well, then I will give you a chance. But if you don't do what you promised. Wang Lu said with a smile, it's easy for you to take my life. After Wang Lu walked out of Moon Capital, he went straight to the barren mountain on the border. The secret agent of Palace of Heaven who followed behind him only followed for a short distance before he disappeared without a trace. When he wanted to follow again, he was blocked by two primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chis that came from nowhere. In desperation, the secret agent of Palace of Heaven had to turn back and pray that he would not be slapped to death by the angry Lady Harmonious Heaven. After returning to Moon Capital, the secret agent was not killed by Moonless. After listening to the report, she remained silent and then left the throne in a flash and came to a bedroom in the harem. A girl as clear as jade and as elegant as a sword sat on the futon, closed her eyes and meditated, cultivating her spirit and nourishing her sword. She placed the skybreaker on her chest, forming a mysterious channel between her and the sword. What a brilliant sword heart, what a great immortal sword skybreaker. Seeing this scene, Moonless could not help but feel a little envious. If she could have such a qualification, such an immortal sword, perhaps she would no longer be the present her. The vassal king of Harmonious Heaven sounded awe-inspiring, but compared with those who truly walked on the top of the immortal path, what did she have? However, while Moonless was in a trance, the girl in front of her had become erratic and vaguely illusory. Moonless instantly reacted. What was left in the bedroom was just a brilliant illusion. Once a deity stage cultivator approached it, the illusion would be difficult to maintain. As for the real person, no one knew how far she had run away. Moonless' anger suddenly erupted. What a bold girl. The next moment, the left hand of the white bone stretched out, and the power of death shrouded her. The bedroom seemed to be filled with the wailing of millions of wronged souls. And Lu Li's figure broke and disappeared without a trace. There was only the immortal sword skybreaker floating in midair. Feeling the approaching power of death, the immortal sword issued a sharp buzzing sound, which, in a split second, squeezed out the elegy of the wronged souls, causing Moonless to feel the turbulence in her jade mansion. What a great immortal sword! Even without a master, it could shake a Taoist master of deity stage with its own power alone. However, it was, after all, an ownerless object. Moonless retracted her left hand and stretched out her right hand, which symbolized life, and directly touched the hilt of the skybreaker. Immediately, the sword transmitted a countershock force. However, the sharp turn of life and death weakened the countershock force a lot. Moonless focused her mind and quickly suppressed the skybreaker. Then, looking at the empty bedroom, a trace of amusement welled up in her heart. Two little guys, using an immortal sword to play the cicada shedding its carapace. How audacious, sharp, and decisive. Were it not for the immortal sword, as the master of Moon Capital, how could Moonless not notice that Lu Li's aura had disappeared from Moon Capital? Even the way she escaped could be guessed by Moonless. It must be that when Wang Lu left, he took away her skybreaker, and then Lu Li used the method of person and sword exchange to put the skybreaker in Moon Capital, and then her real body escaped. However, leaving behind the skybreaker was not a loss. It was just that, why did she always feel that she missed a trick? However, just as Moonless intended to further explore the skybreaker, the sword in her hands suddenly swayed. The quaint sword disappeared and was replaced by a flaming flying sword. Moonless was stunned for a moment, and then she angrily crushed the flaming sword with her left hand made of white bone. Lu Li could not only exchange the person and the sword, but she could also freely exchange the position of different flying swords. Just a day ago, she used this trick to trick Qi Qionying into putting the Skybreaker into the solidifying jade bottle, which led to the tragedy. And now, she used this trick to exchange the civet cat for the crown prince. You two have done a good job. Moonless softly said to herself. Her voice was trembling, her body was trembling, the whole moon was trembling, and so was the palace of heaven. Within 3 days, I will take the lives of the two of you. The determination of a Taoist master of deity stage turned into a thunderbolt from the blue sky. Chapter 559. That was so dangerous, I was almost struck by lightning. Outside the palace of heaven, Wang Lu looked at the bottomless rift behind him with lingering fear. A deity stage cultivator was indeed awesome. Separated by such a long distance, a thunderbolt from the clear sky was powerful enough to turn a king pill-level cultivator into ashes. Fortunately, just now, he and Lu Li did not stand under that thunderbolt. Instead, through a substitute sword, they guided the power of the thunderbolt down and completely poured it into the ground. Looking at the deep rift that was split open by the power of the thunderbolt and smelling the pungent burnt smell in the air, Wang Lu could not help but sigh that even though his cultivation base was far inferior to hers, in terms of IQ, he could completely suppress Moonless. Thus, he could guess her every step of reaction in advance and then make arrangements in advance. Through the magical ability of Lu Li's human sword exchange, Wang Lu successfully helped her escape from Moon Capital. However, immediately after that, they would have to face the full pursuit of a Taoist master of deity stage. Wang Lu didn't think that the time that he had bought would allow the two of them to escape far enough. Therefore, in Moon Capital, Wang Lu simply left some clues for Moonless to actively guide her next move. Lu Li's human and sword exchange was not a flawless escape skill. The reason why she could freely exchange position between human and sword, and even hide from the perception of Moonless as well as the strict monitoring network of Moon Capital, was that Lu Li's brilliant sword heart had refined the flying sword into a part of the cultivator's body. The human and sword exchange was as natural as raising a hand or a foot, and it would not cause any excess magical power fluctuation. However, the flaw was that the connection between the human and sword was too close. Once this point was caught, it could be traced back to her. Secondly, if one wanted to leave an illusion of Lu Li in Moon Capital, in order to delay the time as much as possible, it was necessary to leave a powerful enough immortal sword. Considering the distance and other factors, only Skybreaker could take on this heavy responsibility. However, to leave an immortal sword in Moon Capital, the loss was too heavy. Moreover, the Skybreaker had long been an inseparable part of Lu Li. Once it was taken away, at least half of Lu Li's cultivation base would be wasted. Therefore, when the illusion was broken, Lu Li had to immediately swap the two flying swords, replacing the one that was the least involved with the other. However, in front of Moonless, no matter how mysterious this magical ability was, she would still be able to catch some clues. With Moonless temper, she would definitely take action in anger, and with the ability of a deity stage cultivator, taking the enemy's head from thousands of miles away was as easy as flipping one's hand. Therefore, Wang Lu told Lu Li to prepare the substitute sword in advance, so that at the critical moment, she could sacrifice a flying sword in exchange for her own life. The result was as expected. After changing back the Skybreaker, a bolt of lightning fell from the clear sky. Were it not for Wang Lu's early preparation and promptly escaping with Lu Li, the two of them would have been seriously injured by this bolt of lightning. After this lightning strike, presumably, Moonless herself would be even more annoyed, because her original intention was not to kill the two of them with the lightning strike, but to seriously injure them. Then she would personally come along with the lightning strike to capture the two of them and bring them back to Moon Capital to inflict eternal torture on them. However, the result was that Wang Lu and Lu Li were not hurt by the lightning strike. Moonless lightning strike only smashed Lu Li's flying sword, but failed to leave any mark on the two of them. Right now, Moonless could at most carry out a carpet search through the location of the lightning strike, but it was impossible to specifically search for people. Because Wang Lu and Lu Li had left the boundary of the Palace of Heaven and entered the scope of Sky City. Moonless had great authority in the Palace of Heaven, but it could not be substituted in Sky City. This central city of heavenly earth carried the highest authority of the Temple of Heaven. Among the 9 heavens, Qingtian was at the top, while Shintian and the other 5 lived in Sky City. There were at least dozens of vassal lords like Moonless in Sky City, and Moonless was definitely not the most outstanding among them. Therefore, Wang Lu did not worry that after entering Sky City, Moonless would have the ability to wantonly search for him and Lu Li. After all, Moonless' status as a vassal lord was too special. Not to mention that she was just a harmonious heaven stage. Even if she was promoted by 1 stage, it was impossible for her to act recklessly in Sky City. Once it attracted the attention of Qingtian, Moonless' throne as a vassal lord would be removed in minutes. So, for the time being, we are safe. Lu Li, during this period of time, I will help you heal, and then, let's go through the King Pill tribulation together. Lu Li nodded with a pale face. The girl's face was often full of smile, but at this time, it was replaced by a depressed look. He saw that Lu Li's eyes were without light and her lips were pale. Obviously, her spirit was injured. This was also the price of escape. Even after so many preparations, in the end, the 2 of them still paid a considerable price. The flying sword that Lu Li refined into her body was crushed by Moonless and struck by lightning. For her, it was no less than having her 2 arms cut off. Although she was prepared, the injury was still not light. More importantly, Lu Li was now in the last period of core-nourishing stage before the King Pill tribulation. Although the loss of these 2 flying swords was still within the bearable range, it greatly shook her jade mansion, causing the highly condensed Shudan to show irregular tremor. The King Pill tribulation might not be suppressed anymore. In order to achieve the King Pill tribulation, Lu Li's early preparation was very adequate. Whether it was the level of method, magical power reserve, or state of mind, all of them could be said to be perfect. As long as the opportunity came, she could achieve a perfect breakthrough in one fell swoop. However, such a deep accumulation had actually somewhat gone beyond common sense. If it were someone else, with half of Lu Li's accumulation, it would be impossible for them not to break through. The reason why Lu Li was able to suppress her stage to the present was thanks to her special physique of brilliant sword heart. However, in Moon Capital, the successive battles allowed her to gain rich experience, and then she was continuously shaken by Moonless. Finally, she was somewhat unable to suppress it anymore. With the girl's qualification, there was no bottleneck in achieving the King Pill. If she wanted to achieve it, she could do it at any time. However, at this time, she was seriously injured. If she achieved the King Pill in this situation, then the King Pill would be incomplete, and her previous hard work would be in vain. Therefore, Wang Lu must take Lu Li into the city as soon as possible to heal her injury. Healing in the wilderness was simply courting death. Even if Moonless didn't dare to act rashly in the Sky City, it was easy to secretly capture 2 King Pill level cultivators in the outskirts. The process of entering the city was smoother than expected. After paying the basic entrance fee and showing the token obtained from the Temple of Gorgeous Town, Wang Lu took Lu Li into the central city of the heavenly earth, which was exactly the same as the last time Wang Lu came alone. It seemed that Moonless didn't infiltrate her forces into the Sky City, which was barely good news. Of course, it was also possible that after Moonless calmed down, she let her people secretly monitor the Sky City, and when the preparation was complete, she would strike like thunder. However, Wang Lu couldn't care less. After entering the Sky City, Wang Lu soon found a high-priced training room for rent. The inside was rich in spiritual energy and had a complete set of medicinal pills, although only relatively speaking. Compared to the training room on the brilliant peak of Spirit Sword Mountain, this place was far inferior, but it could barely meet the needs of Lu Li. Moreover, Wang Lu had no room to be picky. In the next 3 days, Wang Lu tried his best to help Lu Li suppress the King Pill and treat her injury. Although he didn't deliberately cultivate the healing immortal method, in any case, he still had the cultivation base of the middle-level king pill, so he quickly helped Lu Li stabilize. A few days later, Lu Li began to cross the king pill. The process was orderly and soon on the right track. It was estimated that in 10 days, she would be able to perfect the pill. This king pill was not easy to achieve. Once the pill was formed, its quality would probably be unprecedented, comparable to Wang Lu's king pill that condensed two great immortal level methods. Wang Lu was quite looking forward to this. However, during the condensing of the king pill, Wang Lu couldn't stay in the training room, so as not to disturb the other party with his own power. Therefore, Wang Lu stood guard outside the door. His non-phase sword defense propped up a faint curtain of light, which excluded all possible interference. On the third day, Lu Li has reached the final step of condensing her golden core. A perfectly round golden core has been formed in her jade mansion. She only needed to perfectly combine it with her body and primordial spirit, and then it would be a success. Wang Lu had been maintaining his non-phase sword defense outside the training room for 3 days and 3 nights, so he was slightly tired. However, thinking that Lu Li was about to condense the pill, his faint excitement made the tiredness not worth mentioning. As the saying goes, the closer one gets to the last step, the more careful one must be in all aspects. If something went wrong in the final stage of the king pill fusion, it would be too late for regrets. Thinking to this, Wang Lu took a deep breath and supported his non-phase sword defense a bit more firmly. In this way, after no one knows how long, he suddenly felt 2 scorching eyes coming from a distance. Wang Lu immediately turned his head, but he only saw a row of snow-white walls. The training room he rented was in a secluded corner on the outskirts of Sky City. Most of the surrounding buildings were empty. They were tall and mighty, but no one lived there. This was a typical planning error of Sky City. However, it was safer to use this place as the place for Lu Li to condense the pill. In the past few days, he had lit up the sword light of his non-phase sword defense day and night, but no one noticed it. However, unexpectedly, at the critical time, it attracted other people's attention. Wang Lu focused his eyes. His eyes penetrated through the layers of buildings and saw that a few miles away, a woman in a splendid dress was looking at him with surprise and joy. Her eyes also penetrated through the layers of obstacles. The woman looked elegant and generous. Her eyebrows were raised, showing a bit of heroic and forthright spirit. Wang Lu felt that she was quite familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her. And at this time, the woman's figure flashed and directly crossed several miles and appeared in front of Wang Lu. The speed of her figure greatly surprised Wang Lu, but what surprised him even more was what followed. "I can't believe you're here." As soon as the woman opened her mouth, all the hair on Wang Lu's body stood up. Because this voice couldn't be more familiar. Just a few days ago, the owner of this voice was the enemy that he focused on. It was the master of Palace of Heaven, Moonless Harmonious Sky. In an instant, Wang Lu didn't have time to think too much. He didn't have time to think about why Moonless would appear here at this time, why the half-skeleton half-beauty would suddenly restore the left half of her body, and why she dared to find trouble with him in Sky City at this time. In a flash, a moment of delay was enough to be fatal. Wang Lu immediately channeled his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi, ready to erupt his full power. Although in front of a Taoist master of deity stage, such power was probably insignificant, he had to buy time for Lu Li. However, Moonless' action was far faster than him. The speed of a Taoist master of deity stage was too fast, even faster than Wang Lu's thought. While the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi was still brewing in the king pill, Moonless had already rushed over, and then, with a few words, she shocked Wang Lu so much that he forgot to resist. "Sister Wu, I missed you so much." Chapter 560. Sister Wu. The familiar address and the familiar tone made Wang Lu, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, feel a chill run down his spine. But at the same time, he forced himself to calm down. His face remained expressionless, and his heartbeat and muscle reactions were perfectly controlled. No matter how much information was contained in the word, Sister Wu, now was not a good time to process it. Moonless was right in front of him, and he had to at least get through this hurdle first before considering other things. Right now, Moonless was smiling like a flower in his bosom. Her face brimming with enthusiasm was overflowing with happiness. It was hard to imagine that just 10 days ago, this was still a horrifying face that was half alive and half dead. Countless people would tremble with fear because of a slight tremble of her eyebrows. But Wang Lu did not dare to be careless, because since she could turn from a living dead into a beautiful girl in a few days, it was hard to guarantee that she would revert to her old ways in the blink of an eye. Now, she was calling him Sister Wu affectionately, but in the next moment, she might turn the other party into ashes with a cold snort. Therefore, Wang Lu had to deal with every reaction, not only for himself, but also for the girl who was crossing the tribulation in the room behind him. However, in the face of a sudden hug, what kind of reaction could be regarded as the right one? Was Moonless throwing herself into his arms showing her true feelings, or was it a realistic disguise? After all, this was Sky City, and if she acted too presumptuously, she might not be able to bear the consequences. There were too many unknowns, making it difficult for him to decide. Should he smile and hug Moonless, or coldly refuse, or simply take out the sword of Mount Kun and fight to the death? Every choice seemed to be somewhat reasonable, but there were also great hidden dangers. In a flash, Wang Lu made a balance in his heart and decided to deal with it in the middle. So he made a response that could be called omnipotent. Hee hee. Neither salty nor weak, neither servile nor overbearing. No matter how many changes you make, I will just hee hee. It was not a delicate response, but it was a supreme weapon to delay time and lead the conversation to the next stage. Sure enough, Moonless didn't care too much after listening. Instead, she rubbed against Wang Lu's arms like a spoiled child and made a lazy nasal sound. Wang Lu broke out in a cold sweat again. Right now, he was wearing the appearance of his master, Wang Wu, by relying on a wonderful illusion technique. Although the illusion technique was exquisite and could perfectly simulate the sense of touch, so the sense of touch that Moonless was experiencing must be very good, it was, after all, an illusion technique. With a Taoist master of deity transformation at such a close distance, Wang Lu really did not have the confidence that he would not be seen through by the other party. Fortunately, Moonless really didn't seem to have any wariness towards her. After dawdling for a while, she raised her head and said, "Sister Wu, I'll come find you again tonight, okay?" Wang Lu muttered to himself, not in a hurry to answer. In fact, he really wanted to nod his head and say, "No problem. You can come tonight. I'll leave this afternoon." But if he answered too eagerly, he might reveal a flaw, so he had to keep her in suspense. Sure enough, as soon as he muttered, it was Moonless' turn to be anxious. She hugged Wang Lu's arm and shook it back and forth. "How about tonight? It's rare for me to come to Tsangtian City." Wang Lu didn't even have time to savor the touch coming from his arm. All his mind was used to analyze the next countermeasures. Judging from the current dialogue, the strength and weakness between Moonless and Sister Wu, or the contrast between the offensive and the defensive was clear at a glance. That majestic vassal lord of Chaotian Palace had been trained by Sister Wu into a weak and vulnerable appearance, so he had a lot of room for mediation at this time. As long as he didn't reveal any obvious flaws, the initiative was in his hands. Tonight. Wang Lu deliberately frowned, and then, under the eager eyes of Moonless, he slowly nodded. "Maybe I can. I have something to do right now, so you go back first. If I have time in the evening, I will look for you." Then, facing the pleasantly surprised look of Moonless, Wang Lu revealed a smile and then waved his finger, making a vague gesture of telepathic finger. Moonless let out a soft, "ah," looking as if she was about to faint from happiness. Her face was flushed and her eyes were filled with tears. I'm so happy." With that said, she covered her face and said in a sacrificial voice, "You wanted me to give up the death-eaten body and made the cultivation I've cultivated for dozens of years go down the drain. But you gave me double the happiness. Thank you, Sister Wu. After that, she turned around and left. Sister Wu, I came to Tsangtian City this time to attend a temporary meeting. I'll be in Chaotian Guild Hall these days, waiting for you. And at the last moment before she left, her eyes were still locked on Wang Lu's outstretched finger, reluctant to part. When Moonless figure flickered and disappeared, Wang Lu just wanted to stick 2 fingers into his own eyes. This play was really too beautiful that no one dared to watch. To be honest, the scene of a young girl yearning for love was actually quite pleasing to the eye, especially when the one in love was a beautiful girl with outstanding appearance. But as long as one remembered that not long ago, she was half alive and half dead, and half of her face was white, no matter how beautiful her appearance was, it would be greatly reduced. What's more, the other party was a vicious and merciless deity stage vassal lord. Compared to the innocent girl, life and death, yin and yang, they were the opposite. Of course, what made people want to poke their own eyes even more was the way she called him Sister Wu. The world was so big, and there might be thousands of Sister Wu, but there was probably only one Sister Wu who could make a deity stage vassal lord change the world in just a few days. Even Wang Lu himself, at this time, sincerely felt admiration for Sister Wu's remarkable ability. Dear Sister Wu, you, in the face of such a person, how could you do it? Is the telepathic finger completely not screening the target? Even the living dead, your taste has already broken through the core of the earth. And what are you planning to do with such a skill? Seduce a rich woman to subsidize your family? TSK, no wonder Hua Yun has the best relationship with you among the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall. It seems that your sisterhood is really deep. As for Ao Guanhai, who also has a good relationship with you, I'm afraid it's just a kind of mutual appreciation between people with great tools. Alas, Sister Wu, when your brother Ouyang Shang gave you all his inheritance, including his magical wisdom and perception, it was not for you to invent these strange and obscene skills. Moreover, when I wanted you to live happily, I didn't want that innocent girl who was infinitely devout to the immortal path to become like this, using her enthusiasm to develop skills to make people happy. It was just that, thinking to this, Wang Lu could not help but feel a pain in the ass. Sister Wu. Alas, I can't believe I can meet my dear Sister Wu in this kind of place. How King elusive are you? What are you doing here instead of idling around in the Spirit Sword Mountain? No matter how I look at you, you don't look like the kind of person who is diligent in the instance. What was even more strange was that the group of old guys in Heavenly Sword Hall actually dared to let her out. Moreover, they even let her go to the Fengdu immortal tombs. Weren't they afraid that she would do something that would bring shame to the Lingjian school for 100 years under the eyes of the Wanxian League? For a time, Wang Lu's thoughts were in a mess. However, after thinking for a while, he could only secretly sigh. To put it bluntly, he was still panicking, because he was not ready to meet Wang Wu again. He intended to calm his mind through a period of actual combat training, and then find a suitable opportunity to meet Wang Wu in a suitable way. Of course, what was the appropriate standard? That was yet to be determined. In any case, now was definitely not the right time. Unfortunately, regardless of whether Wang Lu was suitable or not, Sister Wu was already approaching. Moreover, it was likely that she had already learned of his existence and might appear in front of him at any time. He walked in the heavenly earth with the face of Wang Wu. Thus, when he also entered the heavenly earth and encountered Moonless, Wang Wu would inevitably realize that someone was acting in her name. Considering that the existence of Lu Li had also been exposed. Thus, a simple inference, who would walk in the appearance of Wang Wu and be followed by Lu Li? The answer was clear at a glance. Thinking of this, Wang Lu could not help but feel a bit impatient. Even a few days ago, when he had just entered Sky City with Lu Li, the situation had not yet stabilized, and he might be chased by Moonless at any time. He did not feel so uneasy. Little Lu Li, hurry up and reach the core formation stage. After that, let's go, the further the better. With his back to the training room, Wang Lu softly sighed. However, the next moment, a sneer came from behind him. Go. Where are you going, little Wang Lu? Wang Lu's body instantly froze. Even when Moonless threw herself into his arms with the face of a young girl in love, he did not feel so shocked. However, Wang Lu was indeed Wang Lu. He possessed one of the best mental state among the king pill cultivators. Without any instruction, his non-phase immortal heart madly operated and controlled all the emotional fluctuations of Wang Lu. Calm, he must be highly calm. The strength of that person was far stronger than him, and now that person appeared behind him like a ghost. It could be said that he had the upper hand. In this case, if he wanted to escape, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. Most of his skills came from her teaching. Thinking of the rich inheritance that she inherited, as well as the 150 years of long cultivation time, Wang Lu did not feel that with his current middle-level king pill cultivation base, he was qualified to compete head-on with the famous number 1 king pill in 9 regions. Therefore, the only way to win was to take an unconventional approach, and it must be the kind of unconventional approach that could make the opponent feel shaken. In a flash, Wang Lu had thought a lot and made his own response in the first instance. He turned around, with a smile on his face, and directly threw himself into the arms of the person behind him. Sister Wu, I miss you so much. Then, in the moment when Sister Wu was stunned, Wang Lu lifted his foot and kicked, trying to escape by using the counterforce. This kick even contained primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Let alone wanting to kill you, it was more like wanting you to die. Chapter 561. Sister Wu, IF** King missed you so much. Wang Lu said as he kicked. This kick was fast and ruthless. Combined with the power of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi, it was no less than the full power attack of a middle-grade king pill cultivator. Even if it was a peak king pill cultivator, under a hurry, only half of them could steadily withstand it. However, Wang Lu believed that with Sister Wu's strength, it was absolutely easy for her to withstand this ending descendant's kick with her eyes closed. Therefore, the key question was whether he could take the opportunity to escape. When it came to escape, Wang Lu was not good at it. His speed was mediocre, and he was not proficient in concealment spell. Relying on the countershock force alone to escape from the 9 regions number 1 king pill was tantamount to a fantasy. Therefore, after Wang Lu kicked, he quickly sent a message through his primordial spirit to disturb the enemy. Little Lu Li is having a difficult labor in the house. I'll go find hot water, you protect her. In general, when a normal person received such a message, they would inevitably fall into a great shock, so that they would not be able to make an effective response in a short period of time. Moreover, Wang Lu was deeply aware of Sister Wu's deep bottom line, so when his primordial spirit transmitted the message, he also attached a considerable impact force. If it was against other people, this was simply a two-pronged, deadly killing move. However, Wang Lu knew that even if his attack power doubled, he might not be able to hurt her. He could only hope that she would be unable to react in a hurry, leaving him a little opportunity. As a result, in the next moment, Wang Lu saw the power of the 9 regions number 1 king pill. The primordial spirit attack was like a stone sinking into the sea, silent, as if the target of the attack was a stone rather than a living person. The ending descendant's kick was blocked by an invisible wall of air. The wall of air with absolute defensive power coldly scattered Wang Lu's primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Therefore, the bones of the 5 toes were instantly broken under the impact. Of course, Wang Lu also borrowed the countershock force, but before he had time to combine this force with the forward force of his sword of Mount Kuan, he felt that his shoulder was lightly tapped. In a split second, the magic power that filled his entire body collapsed with a loud bang, no longer listening to his commands. The illusion that could hide from Moonless was also broken. His body, which had been tempered hundreds and thousands of times, became extremely weak, causing Wang Lu to fall down involuntarily. Everything seemed to be irreversible. However, as a non-phase cultivator, his unyielding spirit had already penetrated deep into his bone marrow. Therefore, at the moment when he was about to hit the ground, Wang Lu revolved the already solidified king pill, squeezing out a trace of magical power from it. Although it was just a trace of magic power, it was enough for enlightened king pill to cast a simple spell. Wang Lu's figure suddenly fell down, directly merging with the ground. The tidy stone floor was as soft as water, and he forced his way in. This was the earth escape technique that commanded the earth. Wang Lu's response was extremely fast. After sinking into the ground, he quickly sorted out his magical power and further controlled the earth escape technique, trying to move as fast as possible in the earth. He had experienced 2 trips across the 3,000 worlds, so he was no longer a person blessed by the 9 regions. However, the earth escape technique was like a magical seed, which took root and germinated in his jade mansion. He was confident that his attainment in the earth escape technique was stronger than the vast majority of cultivators with earth heavenly spirit root. As long as he was given a breath of time, he could escape dozens of miles away. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to get this breath of time. The moment he sank into the ground, the earth trembled and cracked. A large amount of soil and gravel were shaken into the sky, and the surrounding spiritual energy became wild and disorderly. Wang Lu's jade mansion suffered a violent impact, and the trace of magical power that he managed to condense with great difficulty flowed away. Once again, he felt an unprecedented sense of emptiness and powerlessness, and with a plop, he fell into the pit. TSK, this time, he really couldn't escape. Wang Lu had no choice but to turn over and face the person that he didn't want to face no matter what. Yo, long time no see. He waved his hand and greeted her. Humph, long time no see indeed. Wang Wu snorted, with a smile yet not a smile on her face. Her eyes flickered, which made Wang Lu feel a pain in the ass. In theory, this fellow should not know anything, but Wang Lu always felt that after coming back this time, it was likely that she would see something. 150 years ago, Wang Wu was an introverted and slow girl. However, in the Great War of the Fallen Immortals, she inherited the legacy left by the most astute and wise person at that time. In any case, Wang Lu felt that if it were him, he would have already seen that there was something wrong with him. Even if he didn't see it, he could pretend to have a problem and then blackmail her. So, what should I do? In a flash, Wang Lu's mind turned hundreds of thoughts, but he couldn't think of any way. Finally, he decided to pretend to be stupid first, and then act according to the circumstances. After looking at him for a few seconds, Wang Wu sneered, took out something from her mustard seed bag and threw it over. It was a hot kettle. The hot water you want. Wang Lu directly threw away the hot kettle, thought for a moment, and then said, the temperature is not right. As a result, Wang Wu directly jumped into the pit, slapped him on the head, and then pulled Wang Lu's collar to pull him up. The temperature is not right? You traitorous disciple want to rebel, don't you? After a few months of not seeing each other, your cultivation base has risen a lot, so you don't put me, the number 1 king pill in 9 regions, in your eyes, do you? Do you think that just because I borrow some money from you, you can be above me? Let me tell you, money is not everything. After hearing this and looking at Wang Wu's righteous expression, Wang Lu suddenly felt that the dark cloud that had been troubling his mind had dissipated. The hesitation and uncertainty about the reunion was, in fact, completely unnecessary. Although it was still a bit difficult to really prepare to face everything in the past and present, it was not necessary to run away before facing it. In short, it was better to leave everything as it was. Compared with the relationship between his big brother and his junior sister, it seemed that this scene made him feel more like a fish in water. Therefore, after a slight sigh, Wang Lu tidied up his red and white robe, and then said to Wang Wu, since money is so useless, I don't want to insult you with useless things anymore. Upon hearing this, Wang Wu gawked and seemed a bit nervous. Then, she continued to speak righteously, if I don't go to hell, who will go to hell? Please insult me. In short, why are you here? Wang Lu asked, are you looking for me? Seeing that Wang Lu no longer mentioned money, Wang Wu breathed a sigh of relief and then said, who has the leisure time to care about you? I came here at the request of the sect to explore the immortal dreamland. Senior brother sect leader told me that there is no one in the entire 9 regions who is more suitable than me to enter the immortal dreamland that only beautiful women can enter. Wang Lu thought for a moment and said, I believe that uncle wants to emphasize that the key point is the king pill stage and below. In short, don't worry, I'm not here for you, and no one will come for you. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu felt awkward. Not to mention anything else, the lead disciple of one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League ran away from home. Didn't it cause any shock? Although the decision to run away from home was made by him, the sect actually didn't give any response, which was really a bit disappointing. Alas, it must be because I've been implicated by some unscrupulous master. Wang Wu seemed to have seen through Wang Lu's thoughts. She shrugged and said, a few months ago, you disappeared in the demon world. Everyone in Spirit Sword Mountain was really worried because of you. Later, when they heard that you accidentally appeared in the Southern Heaven region, the old guys in Heavenly Sword Hall, who were worried sick, prepared a welcoming banquet to wait for you to return to the mountain that night. However, they didn't expect that you actually didn't come. Moreover, you disappeared without a trace, standing all of them up. TSK, at that time, those people's inconceivable and unbelievable faces are still fresh in my memory. I also used a spell to take a picture of it, so that they can redeem it at a high price later. Wang Lu didn't know whether to feel warm or guilty. At that time, there were all kinds of rumors on the mountain. The elders also began to use various methods to find your trace, because they were worried that you were kidnapped. However, there were also a few people with ulterior motives who speculated that you might have defected to the enemy. However, at the critical moment, I came forward to set things right and helped you win your innocence. I told them that if you were the only one missing, then the problem is indeed complicated. But now, even Lu Li, who was sent to the Southern Heaven region for experiential learning, has not come back, so there's only one possibility. As Wang Lu listened, he inwardly imagined the most realistic possibility. In the turmoil, the elders of Heavenly Sword Hall must have asked Wang Wu to find Wang Lu by virtue of the relationship between master and disciple. And Wang Wu was certainly too lazy to move, so she used the reason that Wang Lu had betrayed and defected to the enemy, so it was better to pretend that he never existed. Then, she must have been scolded by the furious disciplinary elder and the sect leader, so she had to seriously think about the whereabouts of Wang Lu. However, looking at Wang Wu's appearance, Wang Lu really didn't dare to imagine what would be the result of her hard thinking on the Spirit Sword Mountain. I told everyone that you must have run away with little Lu Li, and then the 2 of you probably have already pledged to marry each other. Otherwise, how could little Lu Li be so easily abducted by you? Wang Lu was silent. He only regretted that he didn't use a bit more force when he kicked her just now. Wang Wu's reputation as the #1 king pill in 9 regions was indeed well-deserved, but as a cultivator of non-phase method, if he really wanted to find the flaw, it was not impossible. Wang Wu, with a congratulatory smile on her face, patted Wang Lu's shoulder. TSK, speaking of which, you, kid, are really fast, accurate, and ruthless. So easily, you picked up the most eye-catching child face *** in Spirit Sword Mountain. But, you don't have to worry too much. During this time, under my vigorous persuasion, the Heavenly Sword Hall elders no longer have much opinion about this. After all, in their minds, you have always had a good impression, except for senior brother Zhou Ming. That old guy is very stingy. I asked him for dowry several times, but he said that he wanted to fall out with me. His face is really thin and worthless. Asking for dowry at this juncture, elder sister Wu, you're not beaten by Uncle Zhou's brilliant sword heart, it's really because of his self-restraint. Wang Wu continued, so, you actually don't have to leave in such a sorry state. Eloping is really nothing in Spirit Sword Mountain. Moreover, even if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about little Lu Li, right? No matter what, she is a dignified successor disciple of one of the 5 uniques. How could she spend her life with you without any status? Moreover, TSK, when she is in the critical moment of her king pill tribulation, You actually made her have a difficult birth. Your face is really too despicable." Before her voice fell, the training room suddenly trembled, and then the door was opened from the inside, revealing a fresh and curious face. "Fifth Martial Ant? Who did you just say had a difficult birth?" Lu Li stood at the door. Her temperament was clear and refined. Her cherry lips gently opened, and the fluctuation of King Pill-level magical power was completely revealed. Chapter 562. The path of cultivation had never been fair. Although the ultimate goal of a cultivator after setting foot on the immortal path was the unattainable ascension to become an immortal, for most of the cultivators in the world, they could not even touch the edge of the King Pill realm even if they exhausted their entire life's efforts. Being able to successfully reach the Shudan stage was already considered an expert among ordinary cultivators. Of course, compared to the tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of mortals in the 9 regions, being able to possess spiritual roots and set foot on the path to immortality was already an extremely enviable opportunity. In such a cruel environment, the existence of a few geniuses overshadowed the efforts of the other mortals. Cultivators with heavenly spiritual roots were born with the ability to sense the existence of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. After stepping on the path of immortality, their cultivation speed was several times faster than ordinary cultivators. Furthermore, many bottlenecks that troubled other cultivators were nowhere to be seen on the path of cultivation of geniuses. Lu Li was undoubtedly a genius among geniuses. Looking at Lu Li, who had just pushed open the door, even Wang Lu was somewhat envious of her smooth King Pill tribulation. Originally, it was estimated that she would need about 10 days after her injuries healed, but in reality, only 5 or 6 days had passed, and she had seized the opportunity to succeed in one fell swoop. Forming the pill ahead of time naturally meant that she had to bear a huge risk, but behind the risk was a huge reward. Forming the pill ahead of time, not only did it not cause any flaws in the quality of her King Pill, but because of this brave decision, the King Pill had a sharp aura of forging ahead. Before Lu Li achieved the King Pill, she was strong in offense but weak in defense. Now, because of the King Pill stage, her defense had been greatly increased, completely above the ordinary King Pill. However, the increase in her offensive power could be said to be terrifying, which made her offense and defense even more unbalanced. Although they had not actually fought, Wang Lu could vaguely determine that this junior sister of hers, who had just entered the realm of King Pill, had a pure attack power that was not below his own. Once she advanced to the middle grade of King Pill, her attack power would only be above his. It was above a cultivator who had mastered the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Even if the sword demon were to come back to life, he wouldn't be able to do so in the King Pill realm. It could even be said that in the history of 9 regions, there were only a handful of people who could match Lu Li in terms of attack power. Congratulations, enlightened Lazarite. Wang Lu earnestly congratulated Lu Li on her amazing achievement. Even the nearby Wang Wu, in accordance with the usual practice, gave Lu Li a King Pill salute. This meant that from now on, Spirit Sword Sect's disciple Lu Li had the qualification to establish her own sect and be on an equal footing with the other senior cultivators. Of course, this qualification only existed in theory. For a disciple of one of the 5 uniques, the King Pill realm was far from the end. Therefore, Wang Wu quickly restored the amiable smile of an elder and went up to touch Lu Li's head. "This little fellow is really amazing." Lu Li giggled. Then, Wang Wu touched her chest and exclaimed in surprise, "It got bigger again." Before Lu Li could exclaim, Wang Lu had already unceremoniously stabbed Wang Wu with his primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. Put away your claws, harassing a disciple is a crime of treason in Spirit Sword Sect. Be careful not to be caught by the 3rd uncle and be punished with the punishment of eternal castration, henceforth turning into a stone woman. Wang Wu stretched out her finger to dissolve Wang Lu's sword chi and explained, "I'm just doing a physical examination on her. You know, the new King Pill might have some instability in the body. I can see that when you achieved the King Pill, you must have hurt your brain." Wang Lu took advantage of the situation to ridicule him, which made both him and Wang Wu startled at the same time. As if by prior agreement, they both recalled the scene when they reached Jindan. Then they fell into silence together. A moment later, Lu Li broke the silence and curiously asked, "Fifth uncle, what is dystocia?" Well, after perfunctorily answering Lu Li's curiosity, Wang Lu was finally able to get to the point. The meeting with Wang Wu was purely accidental. However, after the accident, the dungeon raid couldn't be stopped. Before continuing, the two must exchange the progress of the dungeon raid to avoid interfering with each other. Wang Lu touched his chin. Where should I start? Is that Moonless you're doing? Wang Wu sneered. That non-mainstream person who makes herself look like a hermaphrodite? Incisive evaluation. In short, did you completely subdue her? It's easy. My telepathic finger made her forget her surname. By the way, are you interested in my new invention? I can teach you. Wang Lu also sneered. Forget it, I have a weapon that's sharper than the telepathic finger. Wang Wu asked with a somewhat strange look, a sharper weapon? What do you mean? If there's a chance, I'll let you see it. In short, you've subdued Moonless, and now you've come to Sky City. What are you going to do? Wang Wu said, of course, it's to use Moonless as a stepping stone to find a way to get rid of the supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven and then replace him. Don't you claim to be a professional adventurer? You still can't see such a simple thing? You should know that the supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven is roughly equivalent to a supreme-level cultivator in 9 regions, right? I know, so what? Wang Wu inexplicably looked at Wang Lu. That old thing Feng Yin's strength is also equivalent to the supreme level. I've been planning to overthrow his brutal rule for so many years, but nothing happened. It can be seen that the supreme level is actually not that great. After all, I'm the number 1 king pill in 9 regions. Wang Lu inwardly sighed, thinking that this pretentious act could be given full marks. Of course, he knew that the theoretical biggest benefit of this immortal dreamland was to get rid of the Temple of Heaven and establish a new religious regime. The problem was that it could not be done in practice. That supreme leader alone had the cultivation base of supreme level. With Wang Lu's current strength, he could not handle it, and no king pill could. Not to mention that the opponent was not a lone person, but a huge organization. The immortal dreamland restricted the strength of the participants to not exceed the level of king pill. In fact, the strategy to restrict the participants must be within a certain framework. Otherwise, if a team of supreme-level cultivators were allowed to come in, they could easily destroy the Temple of Heaven, and then expand the heavenly earth into their own harem. This immortal dreamland would then become purely a lewd dreamland. It was even more exaggerated to think that if one had absolute force, they could even break the passage between the heavenly earth and the chaotic world. After unifying the world, they could lead the female army into the chaotic world and unify the 2 worlds. At that time, the benefits would be even more. However, there was no such amiable immortal dreamland in the group of immortal tombs, and the king pill level restriction could only make these plans a mere fantasy. However, even the Dixian people who designed the group of immortal tombs probably did not expect that there would be a perverted king pill cultivator in the future to smash the scene. In this immortal dreamland, perhaps Moonless Harmonious Heaven was originally set to be the biggest enemy, and the high-level people of Sky City were just background settings. But now, the biggest enemy was killed by a single finger, and the background settings were put on the stage. However, could a mere Wang Wu really confront the Temple of Heaven under the command of a supreme-level cultivator? After being her disciple for so many years, he actually had an assessment of the limit of her strength. As the number 1 king pill in 9 regions, Wang Wu was indeed powerful to the point of making one's hair stand on end. Let alone the other king pill cultivators, even among the Yuanying stage cultivators, almost no one was her opponent. Even the slightly weaker deity stage cultivators were not enough, such as Moonless. However, king pill, after all, had its limit. Even if she had a double king pill, she could only deal with middle-level deity stage cultivators, and it would be difficult for her to win against high-level deity stage cultivators. As for those who surpassed deity stage and reached the level of supreme, it would be difficult for her to even save her life. Of course, it was already shocking for a king pill to be able to do this. However, Wang Wu seemed to have a well-thought-out card up her sleeve, as if she really thought that she could swallow the Temple of Heaven, this behemoth. Wang Lu thought, could it be that Sister Wu has been hiding her true strength for so many years? At the same time, he also modified his own plan based on her plan. For a moment, he was lost in thought. Seeing this, Wang Wu curiously asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I was thinking, if I go to the Temple of Heaven at this time to expose you, how many benefits will I get?" "Damn you, this rebellious disciple, deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors is as natural as drinking water. I'm just not used to standing on the side of a loser. Who told you that I will fail? This time, my odds of winning are quite big, okay?" Wang Wu explained, the supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven is about to retire. At present, the temple is preparing for the change of leadership. This is a God-given opportunity. The supreme leader still has the concept of retirement? Of course there is. The Temple of Heaven is a religious organization, and the power of religious leaders usually comes from the heaven, not from themselves. The leader of the Temple of Heaven indeed has the strength of a supreme, but excluding the religious blessing, his body is at most just a high-level deity stage cultivator. In fact, the middle and high-level monks of the Temple of Heaven are like this. Once they retire from their position, their cultivation base will plummet. Wang Lu nodded. So that's how it is. No wonder you can kill the deity stage moonless with one finger. This kind of power from the outside world has its flaws, right? Exactly. But even so, it is not worth the loss to confront a supreme, so I consider looking for an opportunity during the change of leadership. After this Qing Tian retires, there are 7 competitive candidates. In addition to the 6 Shenshens, there is also the extremely powerful harmonious heaven of the western regions. The 7 people have equal opportunities. They have been secretly fighting for several years, but there is still no definite result. However, the change of leadership is imminent. I'm afraid it won't be long before the conflict will fully intensify, and at that time, my opportunity will come. Through Moonless Palace of Heaven? Wang Lu reacted very quickly and immediately guessed Wang Wu's plan. The 7 candidates had been competing for several years without any result, indicating that the competition of Qing Tian relied more on the forces under their control, rather than the direct designation of heaven. In fact, since heaven was not a personified god, of course, it would not directly show its spirit to designate Qing Tian as the candidate. The 7 candidates occupied the peak of power in heavenly earth. Each of them had supporters behind them, but it was difficult to distinguish who was superior. Then at this time, Palace of Heaven, which had always been independent, became an important force that was enough to affect the balance and even determine the result. So the attitude of Moonless was particularly important. Although the status of the 7 candidates was higher than that of Moonless, they were bound to actively strive for her support. And in this process, Wang Wu's opportunity came. She could take the opportunity of the meeting between the 2 sides to ambush the candidates and turn them into obedient meat slaves with the telepathic finger. Then, with the full support of Moonless, she would support her own meat slave to the position and indirectly control heavenly earth from then on. Thinking of this, Wang Lu had to sigh that Wang Wu's idea was really ingenious. In fact, my chess pieces are not only moonless. According to my plan, when the time comes for the final battle between the 7 candidates, I want to have at least 3 harmonious heaven monks and at least 15 open heaven monks. This kind of power will be enough to form an independent 8th party. Only then will I be able to truly secure victory. With so many people, are you going to use your personal charm to summon them? Wang Wu was dismissive of this. How can an illusory personal charm compare to the telepathic finger? Chapter 563. After listening to Wang Wu's grand idea, Wang Lu once again fell into contemplation. Although it seemed that her idea was somewhat fantastical, rationally speaking, there was not much problem with the feasibility. After all, if Wang Wu, this abnormal king pill, joined this immortal dreamland, it would be easy to form a crushing situation. Not to mention that she also had telepathic finger. In this world without men, she was simply lawless. Of course, this was not accurate enough, because there was still a man in heavenly earth, and it was a strong man whose function was absolutely superior to a mere telepathic finger. However, Wang Lu would not be stupid enough to jump out and work for Wang Wu at this time. 3 harmonious heavens and 15 open heavens. If a strong and fierce man were to deal with them, it would be a disaster. Therefore, it was better to let Wang Wu show off her telepathic finger. At worst, it would just be tenosynovitis. However, there was still a problem. According to Wang Wu, the time of the Temple of Heaven's succession was not far away. Would it be too late to subdue the 18 high-level people one by one? Of course it's too late. There is still a week before the succession ceremony, and I still have a lot of helpers here. You still have helpers? Wang Lu began to feel that something was wrong. You didn't come alone. Yes, Feng Yin and the others think that this is a rare experiential learning opportunity. If they only consider the magical treasures in the immortal dreamland, it would be a pity. It is better to take this opportunity to let the younger generation gain experience and broaden their horizons. Therefore, they want me to lead the team and bring almost all the talented female disciples in the sect whose cultivation base is around King Pill. Wang Lu was shocked. Is sect head Uncle Master's brain flooded with water? It is rare for Lingjian school to have a few pure flowers, but they are actually handed over to you. Aren't you afraid of ruining them? What do you think I am, this traitorous disciple? A humanoid telepathic finger. I will not make a move on my own disciple. Really? Who was the one who wanted to marry me when he saw my wealth? You still have the nerve to mention that time? Wang Wu stomped her foot on the spot. It's rare for me to propose to someone, but you rejected me without hesitation. He simply doesn't put the dignity of a teacher in his eyes. Sorry, your dignity as a teacher is too insignificant. I really can't see it. In short, I brought quite a few people with me this time. With their help, we have more than enough time. Who are they? First, there's Yao, heir. She's the strongest, and she's strong enough to hold her own. I wanted her to deal with 8 open heavens within 3 days and give them to me to train. It's only been half a day, and she's already dealt with 2. Wang Lu narrowed his eyes. Eldest senior sister? As expected of the sect leader's direct disciple. Yes, after achieving the king pill, Yao heir has finally completely digested the inheritance of the ancient sword tomb. In terms of swordsmanship alone, she can already compete with the elders of some high-rank sections. Thinking of the eldest senior sister whose attainment in swordsmanship was so strong that even the genius Lu Li had to concede defeat, Wang Lu was not surprised that she could easily deal with the open heavens who were equivalent to Yuan Ying stage. Then there's Shi Xian and that stupid cat. The fighting ability of this spirit beast group is a bit worse. I assigned them 6 targets, and now they've solved one of them. Their progress seems to be barely able to catch up. Wang Lu was quite surprised. Even Bai Shi Xian has come out of the mountain. She's actually willing to come out with you? In Wang Lu's impression, the daughter of Grand Cloud Fairy had a tranquil and natural character, and didn't like to go out for experiential learning. In addition to him, it was difficult for ordinary people to call her. Of course, it's because of my personal charm. Wang Wu was full of confidence. Anything else? The last 2 people are the non-combat group, Yu Xinyao and Little Ling, heir. Before she could finish, Wang Lu interrupted in surprise, Feng Ling. Why is she here? Didn't they say that she can't leave the Blue River region? Before, it was indeed impossible, but during the period when you were missing, the Heavenly Sword Hall developed a mountain range seal. As long as you carry this seal, no matter where you are, it's the same as being in the Spirit Sword Mountain. This time, I called Little Ling, heir, to come with me because I want to test the effect of the mountain range seal. At present, it seems that the effect is good, and her strength can also be exerted in the Southern Heaven region. Therefore, although it's a non-combat group, when necessary, she must have the ability to protect herself. Wang Lu nodded. I understand. 2 combat groups, 1 soy sauce group, plus yourself, there's enough manpower. In a week's time, there's indeed enough time to capture those 18 people. Moreover, even if there's a problem in the middle and you don't capture all the targets, you can still count on Moonless, the leader of the Palace of Heaven, which you already have in your hand. It's enough to ensure that your next plan can be carried out smoothly. Yes, and if I can capture all the targets, I can even go further. I don't need to support any puppets, but instead, I can personally inherit the Temple of Heaven and completely control the Temple of Heaven and even the heavenly earth. Wang Wu said and then turned to look at Wang Lu. According to the original calculation, if I want to perfectly implement this plan, I'm still a bit short on manpower, so my goal is not set too high. But now that I've met you and little Lu Li, I think I might as well do things perfectly. How about it, do you want to help me? You and Lu Li should also need this kind of actual combat experience, right? Sure. Wang Lu thought for a moment. If they had the support of Wang Wu, he and Lu Li even dared to challenge the harmonious heaven-level opponents. Thus, he nodded in agreement. Good, then come with me to the stronghold first. You and Lu Li take a rest. After you fully recover, I'll take you to participate in the action. Under the leadership of Wang Wu, the group of 3 came to an exquisite and gorgeous courtyard in Sky City. This was a real estate purchased by a Kotian-level nun in Sky City. Although the location was not in the center of the city, it was still very valuable. However, when that Kotian-level nun was knocked out by Zhu Shiyao in an ambush and sent to Wang Wu to have a taste of telepathic finger, she obediently handed over the real estate. Now, it had become Wang Wu's stronghold. When Wang Lu came to the entrance of the courtyard, he saw a girl in the courtyard holding a volume of swordsmanship book. She was reading it while walking, and her eyes were in a trance. When she heard the footsteps at the entrance of the courtyard, the girl's thoughts were interrupted. She turned her head and suddenly showed an incredible look. Ah, Wang. Senior brother Wang Lu, it's you. Wang Lu waved his hand. Junior sister Yu, long time no see. Where have you been all this time? Yu Xinyao put down the swordsmanship book in her hand and impatiently asked, everyone is so worried about you. It's a long story. After Wang Lu finished speaking, he saw that Yu Xinyao's eyebrows were slightly wrinkled and her eyes were moist. Obviously, she was not satisfied with this answer. Wang Lu had no choice but to helplessly shrug his shoulders and said with a smile, in short, I had a good dream. Sweet dreams. Yu Xinyao curiously tilted her head, but then she suddenly saw that after Wang Lu left, Lu Li, who was holding a bag of candy, ran into the courtyard with a face full of interest. She then threw herself to the ground, hugged Wang Lu's arm, shook it, and said in a spoiled manner, Senior brother, I still want that candy, can you reward me a little more? Yu Xinyao was immediately stunned. Her eyes inconceivably swept between Wang Lu and Lu Li, and then her expression quickly turned gloomy. So the good dream that senior brother said is. I'm sorry, just now, in a moment of desperation, Xinyao was too abrupt and asked a question that I shouldn't have asked. Please forgive me, senior brother. Wang Lu was baffled. What do you mean rude? Yu Xinyao refused to say anything more and shook her head. I'm sorry, I don't feel very well, I'll take my leave first. With that, the girl flew out of the courtyard on her flying sword and flew in the other direction of Sky City. Wang Lu watched Yu Xinyao's departing back. He was stunned and felt that he seemed to have encountered some kind of misunderstanding. Looking back, he saw Wang Wu's gloating smile. Little Lu, you're really a scum. What the? Being evaluated by the person who was the least qualified to criticize others as scum was simply a strange injustice. Wang Lu stared at his master's smiling face and was speechless for the time it takes to drink a cup of tea. After a long time, Wang Lu finally calmed down. When he was about to find Yu Xinyao to explain, he heard a person quickly coming in from outside the door. That crisp footstep, as well as the slightly rough action of pushing the door, were all characteristics of a certain person. Wang Lu turned around and greeted, "Long time no see, Sister Ling." As a result, before he could finish his words, Feng Ling angrily pointed at his nose and asked, "Just now I saw Xinyao go out crying, and when I asked, she only said you came back. What did you do to her?" "I just had a good dream." By the time he explained everything to Feng Ling and Yu Xinyao, a long time had already been wasted. After the misunderstanding was solved, Yu Xinyao and Feng Ling were extremely embarrassed and apologized to Wang Lu. However, just as Yu Xinyao raised her head full of self-blame, she heard a burst of footsteps outside the door. It turned out that Bai Shixian and the cat girl Ling Yan had returned. Seeing Wang Lu in the courtyard, the two spirit beast girls were taken aback, but Ling Yan obviously showed a disgusted expression and then hid in the shadow behind Bai Shixian. As for Bai Shixian, she calmly nodded to Wang Lu and then said, "Half a day ago, I met several Yin and Yang school's junior sisters outside Gorgeous Town. They asked me to say hello to you, senior brother." Okay. An ominous premonition rose in Wang Lu's heart. "They also said that next time we have a chance to play together, the way we play will certainly satisfy you. They are deliberately playing with me, aren't they?" Bai Shixian looked at Wang Lu, and then looked at Lu Li, and then continued, "They said that next time, they will never lose to Lu Li." The nearby Yu Xinyao gently covered her mouth. Her eyes wandered between Wang Lu and Lu Li for a moment, and then she sighed, covered her face, and walked away. Feng Ling fiercely glared at Wang Lu, and then accompanied Yu Xinyao to leave. Wang Lu blankly watched the two people gradually go further and further away, thinking that this was the so-called Azura field. Behind him, his master considerately patted his shoulder and asked, "Do you need me to teach you telepathic finger to solve the crisis?" Chapter 564. For many people who were doomed to live a lonely life, the Azura field was actually a happy worry. However, in the Azura field, Wang Lu really couldn't be happy. Because of a joke made by a few unrestrained women from Yin and Yang school, a group of junior sisters from his own school accidentally became hostile to him. That stupid cat picked up from the Grand Cloud Mountain looked at him as if she was looking at those bastard men from Beast Master School, perverts. And although Bai Shixian always had a spring breeze-like smile on her face, the distance between them was actually a few steps further than usual. Even the most well-behaved Lu Li was pulled to the side by Feng Ling, telling her to keep her distance from that scum. At first, Lu Li certainly didn't want to, but after the lady boss of the Spirit Creek town took out a box of snacks, she readily complied. At that time, Wang Lu narrowed his eyes. He painstakingly protected little Lu Li from the King Pill tribulation, but in the end, she was bribed by a box of snacks. However, before long, Lu Li took advantage of Feng Ling's unpreparedness to sneak over to Wang Lu and lifted the box of snacks in her hand. "Senior brother, do you want to taste it? Sister Lingling's craftsmanship is great." Wang Lu was moved. He reached out and touched Lu Li's head. "I really didn't dote on you in vain." Unfortunately, among this group of people, only Lu Li was still standing on his side. Wang Wu, the bitch who could be called the culprit, was gloating all the way. She didn't even bother to pay attention to her own business and just watched the excitement for half a day. And when Wang Lu asked her to make an objective statement, she laughed. "I still have business to do, so I can't play with you guys anymore. You guys can slowly quarrel with each other, but don't hurt the harmony, ha ha ha." And then, before leaving, she affectionately blew a kiss. What AF * king malicious intent. At this time, Wang Lu couldn't help but think of the time travel dream, the parting kiss between Ouyang Shang and Wang Wu. Thinking of that scene, he couldn't wait to take an iron file and grind his lips off. Sigh, it's really hard to communicate with those who don't have enough IQ. Forget it, I can't be bothered to entertain them. Let them continue to be stubborn. Xiao Yuli, let's go and find a chance to push harmonious heaven away. In the face of this dog shit-like situation, Wang Lu resolutely decided to withdraw. Rather than stay and reason with a few angry women, he felt that it was easier to push down harmonious heaven. Moreover, it was more in line with the needs of this trip. Of course, the so-called simple was only relative. Wang Lu and Lu Li, according to the map left by Wang Wu, successfully ambushed an ascetic nun who came to Sky City from afar. Even though they had ambushed first and had the advantage of time and place, the battle was still thrilling. Looking at the person who was tied up like a dumpling with the immortal binding rope, Wang Lu was filled with emotions. The harmonious heaven stage and the deity transformation stage were truly extraordinary. Even though they had used a concealment spell to launch a joint attack with Skybreaker, they were able to severely injure their opponent in the blink of an eye. Then, after a hard fight, they were finally able to take down the ascetic nun who had never been in actual combat for more than 100 years. The gap between King Pill and deity transformation stage was really too big. Judging from the result of this battle, Wang Lu reckoned that even if his cultivation base reached the peak of King Pill and his non-phase method reached the theoretical peak of King Pill, he would at most have the power to protect himself in front of a deity transformation stage cultivator. Moreover, it was limited to low-level deity transformation stage. Encountering an opponent like Moonless, even if Wang Lu had the cultivation base of King Pill, he could only escape at most, and it was impossible for him to face the opponent head-on. Thinking of the number 1 King Pill in 9 regions who easily subdued Moonless with telepathic finger, Wang Lu had to sigh with emotion that the road of immortal cultivation was really long and boundless. Who the hell are you? Attacking the ascetic nun of the Temple of Heaven without authorization, don't you want your life anymore? Wang Lu's thoughts were interrupted by the angry and ashamed voice of the ascetic nun. Looking down, he saw the tall girl, who seemed to be only about 26 or 27 years old, struggling powerlessly under the restraint of the binding immortal rope. You will suffer the wrath of heaven. Most of the ascetic nuns of the Temple of Heaven were a group of people with stubborn but gentle temperament. Many of them would not change their smile even when facing a sword. They firmly believed that all the suffering was a test given by heaven, and their pace on the immortal path would become more solid with the passing of the suffering. Therefore, for this girl to angrily question, struggle, and even curse, she must have experienced quite serious pain and torture. However, Wang Lu knew that from the beginning to the end of the previous fight, he and Lu Li were almost always suppressed. It was not until the injury caused by the ambush could no longer be suppressed that the fight came to an end. From the beginning to the end, if one wanted to talk about torture, it was his side who suffered more. Under the full counterattack of a Daoist Master of Deity stage, keeping his non-phase sword defense from breaking and providing an opportunity for Lu Li to fight back was simply a fantasy for a King Pill level cultivator. Even though her actual strength after the sneak attack was only below peak Yuanying stage, Wang Lu still had to break more than 100 of his non-phase sword bones before he was finally able to support himself. And now, he, who was trying his best to recover from his injury, didn't complain, so what could she complain about? Was it because the binding immortal rope used a tortoiseshell technique to bind her? That should be no big deal, right? Moreover, the truth of this matter was, although Wang Lu knew how to use the magical treasure binding immortal rope, he was not good at binding. If he didn't accidentally see the tortoiseshell technique on the album that his master left in the bedroom, if he wanted to bind people, he could only tie them into a cocoon. Moreover, what was wrong with the tortoiseshell technique? It could perfectly display the beautiful figure of a woman, which could be called art. As a captive, she could actually enjoy the treatment of art. Wang Lu really couldn't understand what this ascetic nun was angry about. However, there was no need to understand. Now that he had caught the person, he just needed to bring her back to Wang Wu's secret stronghold outside Sky City. After being trained by her telepathic finger, the mission would be complete. Although this battle was difficult, the harvest was exceptionally rich. Not to mention that his non-phase sword art was directly promoted by 2 levels, even the King Pill in his Jade Mansion, under the heavy pressure, showed signs of further transformation. This battle was enough to be worth several months of hard work, which could be considered as a big profit. Although the profit was a little strange, it was a little strange. Under normal circumstances, there was no such thing as fighting to nurture fighting. The belligerent would die. This was the conclusion of the ancient saying. Because the battle itself could not provide enough profit to pay for the cost. The breakthrough in the battle was actually built on the basis of a large amount of accumulation in the early stage, a momentary burst of inspiration. Even for those evil cultivators who were good at refining flesh and blood for their own use, after a fierce battle, it would take a long time to really digest the enemy's flesh and blood, and the efficiency would not necessarily improve by much. However, Wang Lu recently experienced the taste of nurturing fighting with fighting. After every hard battle, he could feel that his strength was improving by a visible margin, which completely broke the common sense of the immortal cultivation world. In fact, from the beginning of the King Pill realm, Wang Lu vaguely found that his own path of cultivation had changed from the beginning. The King Pill, his body, and his primordial spirit, were easily stimulated by the battle and thus transformed. In other words, it was easier to get benefits in the battle. Thinking about it carefully, perhaps when he condensed the King Pill, the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi and the non-phase method were also combined with something else. The King Pill of a cultivator carried not only his power, but also his life. When a brilliant cultivator reached core formation, they would put everything that they had experienced in their own path of cultivation into it. And Wang Lu's path of cultivation was undoubtedly one adventure after another. From the experiential learning in the small clear sky peak during the body forging stage, to the wisdom sect during the chi cultivating stage, to the elite of the 10,000 arts sect during the foundation establishment stage, and to the Shudan stage, to the magnificent adventure journey. He left his own footprints in the Grand Cloud Mountain, the ancient sword tomb, and the western continent, and even created a legend. Unfortunately, after one battle after another, Wang Lu's immortal cultivation gain was lackluster. Although his talent was excellent and he could quickly make up for it through secluded cultivation, after all, it seemed to be a waste of time. Unexpectedly, after the King Pill, this defect seemed to have been made up. People often said that the King Pill of cultivators was boundlessly mysterious. Even those supreme who had a foothold in the immortal path couldn't completely crack its mystery. Therefore, for a time, Wang Lu couldn't analyze the mystery of his King Pill. However, in short, it was a good thing, so he just accepted it for the time being. On the other side, Lu Li also seemed to enjoy a similar treatment. Although the girl was tired and the magical power in her jade mansion had been consumed by 80 to 90%, her eyes had become sharper. Obviously, her sword intent had been sublimated in the battle, which also realized the battle to nurture the battle. Speaking of which, little Lu Li has also experienced a lot of things with me. Could it be that she was affected by this? While thinking, Wang Lu transported his spoils of war and quietly walked toward Wang Wu's stronghold. An hour later, he saw Wang Wu in an ordinary house 100 miles away from Sky City. "You're done already?" Wang Wu looked at Wang Lu with some surprise. "As a man, your speed is unexpectedly fast." And when she saw Wang Lu put down the ascetic nun from his shoulder, Wang Wu's eyes lit up. "Good binding. It's actually an ascetic nun, a top-notch material. This time, I'll make you a top-notch meat slave." With that, Wang Wu got up and walked to the front of the ascetic nun. She stretched out her finger and pointed it at the center of her forehead. The next moment, the ascetic nun, who was known for her tenacious willpower, suddenly trembled. Her closed eyes suddenly opened and incredulously looked at the woman in white in front of her. The slender finger was still pointed at the center of her forehead. After only a moment, the skin of this divinity transformation stage cultivator began to redden, and sweat poured down like rain. Her eyes, too, began to wander and become vacant. The woman's lips gently opened and unconsciously let out a groan, as if she had experienced great pain. However, what kind of pain could make an ascetic nun lose control like this? With just a glance, Wang Lu could not help but take a deep breath. What could make an ascetic nun unable to resist was, of course, not pain, but pleasure, extreme pleasure. Damn, so this is the true face of telepathic finger? I've been looking forward to this scene for nothing. But, in general, Sister Wu, you really have a skill. Using this telepathic finger to deal with an ascetic nun who has never tasted meat, I'm afraid the damage would be doubled. No wonder you say this is a top-notch material. As time went by, the groan of the ascetic nun became louder and louder. While Wang Lu was repeatedly clicking his tongue at the scene before him, a girl's voice suddenly came from behind him. What is fifth aunt doing? Upon hearing this, Wang Lu was startled. Little Luli? Why are you here? Luli was baffled. I came back with you, senior brother. But I didn't let you enter the room. This scene is not suitable for children, you, little guy, better not. Before he could finish, he heard the ascetic nun let out a high-pitched scream. Her whole body trembled violently, and the robe between her legs revealed a clear water stain. Ah, senior brother, look, she actually peed. Luli pointed at the woman on the ground in surprise, and then thoughtfully sighed. Deity stage cultivators can also pee. Wang Lu thought for a moment and then, taking advantage of the fact that the smell of lust in the air had not yet become strong, he explained to Luli, because your fifth aunt is using the long-lost bladder finger. This move is used to torture prisoners. It's very dirty, and there's nothing to see. So, quickly go outside and play. Oh. Chapter 565. After sending Luli away, the training in the hut began again. Wang Wu's telepathic finger indeed had a miraculous effect on the Temple of Heaven nun. In theory, the ascetic nun who could endure thousands of cuts without batting an eyelid could only persist until the second round of telepathic finger before she completely lost the will to resist and began to lose consciousness. After the third and fourth round, the poor nun was completely lost. There was a significant change in her eyes. From the initial firmness, it gradually softened, and soon it transitioned to confusion and intoxication. The whole process only took Wang Wu half an hour. An hour later, when Wang Wu got up and withdrew her finger, the already soaked ascetic nun was reluctant to part with her. She leaned against Wang Wu's leg and looked up at her with an extremely eager gaze. Do you want it? Wang Wu asked. She nodded without hesitation. He, if you want it, wait until tomorrow. The ascetic nun immediately showed an unbearable expression. What do you want? I'll give it to you. Please don't leave me alone. Simple pain was not difficult to bear for the ascetic nun, but the emptiness after the bliss was worse than any pain. Wang Wu shrugged. Unfortunately, today's share has been used up. Impossible. The ascetic nun decisively judged, that's not an unbearable consumption for you. Yes, I do have spare energy, but I also have a lot of people who need to be taken care of. There's no reason for me to waste too much of my precious physical strength on a prisoner of war, right? But, Wang Wu smiled. My telepathic finger is only open to my own people without restriction. If you want it, you have to give up your position and become my people. But, can you do it? The ascetic nun indeed hesitated. Although her will was tortured by the telepathic finger to the point of collapse, her 100 years of cultivation and 100 years of faith were like an iron wall erected in her heart. Seeing her hesitation, Wang Wu pointed at Wang Lu and said, if you are one of us, besides the telepathic finger, you can also enjoy the ultimate heavenly weapon which is far more effective. Unfortunately, you are devoted to serving the heavens, so you probably have no chance to see it. Wang Lu was shocked. You pervert, how dare you drag me into this? Wang Wu looked at him and provoked, are you not confident enough in your ultimate divine weapon? Wang Lu was silent for a while, then he turned to the ascetic monk and said, my ultimate heavenly weapon is also known as the spear of piercing dead thorns. It has the ability to pierce through everything and reverse cause and effect. Once it is used, it can make the sky rain and the sun and moon change. Unfortunately, it is only open to my family. You have no chance to see it. As soon as these words came out, not only did the ascetic monk reveal a leisurely look of fascination, but even Wang Wu could not help but be surprised. I can't tell that you're also a fierce warrior in the field of bragging. Wang Lu shook his head. I'm telling the truth. If I didn't have the spear of piercing dead thorns, why do you think I have so many female followers? Why did the spirit of the Grand Cloud Mountain not hesitate to sacrifice herself to help me achieve Shidon? Why did Aya abandon the throne of the Night King and return to the mountain with me? Qianghua is the pride of the lead disciple of Xingjing. Why did she concede defeat to me several times? As Wang Wu listened, her eyes could not help but widen. Now that you've said it, it seems to be somewhat reasonable. Wang Lu glared at Wang Wu. If you don't believe me, you can try it yourself, but you'd better be mentally prepared. While Wang Wu was stunned, the ascetic monk, who had been listening by the side, gritted his teeth and weighed the pros and cons in his heart. I understand, please let me follow you. 100 years of faith collapsed just like that. Seriously, what is going on with your telepathic finger? After sending away the seductive ascetic monk who had completely become Sister Wu's slave, Wang Lu couldn't help but ask curiously. You still don't understand? It's actually a variant of primordial spirit skill. Primordial spirit skill? Wang Lu remembered that he had heard the elders mention it when he was in class at the Ting Cloud Hall. The so-called primordial spirit skill usually referred to the skill that targeted the opponent's primordial spirit. Because the existence of a cultivator was fundamentally based on the primordial spirit, once the primordial spirit was damaged, no matter how great the magical power was, it would be useless. However, the primordial spirit was hidden in the Purple Mansion, protected by the physical body, Jade Mansion, and other layers of protection. If one wanted to penetrate the Purple Mansion and directly penetrate the primordial spirit, it was better to use powerful magical power to directly crush the opponent. Of course, common sense was common sense. After tens of thousands of years of development in the immortal cultivation world, there were always people who could find another way to bypass the outer protection of the Purple Mansion and directly affect the primordial spirit. This kind of skill was now spread among the major sections. Many evil cultivators hooked souls and refined living people into puppets. Some enchantresses charmed all living beings, causing high officials and dignitaries to become servants under their skirts. This skill could be regarded as a kind of primordial spirit skill. And the righteous cultivators naturally did not lack similar means, it was just that they would not easily use it. First, it was bad for their reputation. Second, after so many years, there were too many people who had suffered a loss from primordial spirit skill. The relevant defensive skills had been developed and perfected, so it was getting harder and harder to penetrate the primordial spirit. Of course, for those top-ranked sects with rich collections, the so-called difficulty only depended on whether the cultivators in the sect were willing to study it or not. Among the 5 uniques, there was no lack of cultivators who used primordial spirit skill as their core method, so their strength was not necessarily weak. It was just that Wang Lu didn't know when his master learned such a skill. As far as the elders of the 5 uniques were concerned, the several elders of Spirit Sword sect were considered young, about 200 years old. In a place like Xingjing sect, most of them would not be able to wash away their disciple status. Even though they inherited the legacy of the Golden Generation and achieved amazing achievements in a short period of time, and their strength was not weaker than the other elders of the 5 uniques, but in terms of comprehensive method, they should be relatively deficient. Fortunately, the Lingjian school mainly focused on sword cultivation, and the cultivators used all kinds of sword arts as their core. One sword to break 10,000 methods, so it didn't matter if their all-roundness was lacking. For example, Wang Wu, in addition to her non-phase sword, she had almost no other strong point. However, with the illustrious reputation of the number 1 king pill in 9 regions, no one dared to provoke her. But now, it seemed that he had somewhat underestimated her. Thinking about it carefully, after inheriting the legacy of Ouyang Shang, she had the top perception in 9 regions. Since her 150 years of cultivation couldn't break the bottleneck of King Pill to Yuanying stage, then the horizontal development was enough for her to become the most versatile cultivator. However, in Wang Lu's impression, his master was indeed versatile. In eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling, she was indeed a master, but when it came to proper business, she was simply a waste wood. Primordial spirit skill, such a high-end thing, was completely incompatible with her. I know you must be slandering me in your heart, but I have to say, you have too many misunderstandings about me. Wang Wu put on a lonely master posture. Wang Lu said, hee hee. Don't forget, in the non-phase method that I taught you, the defense against primordial spirit skill is one of the key contents. In the beginning, I was afraid that you would be taken away by the infatuated girls in the immortal cultivation world as a sperm donor, so I carefully improved the method for you. If you don't have a deep understanding of primordial spirit skill, how could you do a good defense? Let alone telepathic finger is actually not a high-end skill, it only has a special effect on a few people. Wang Wu explained, the first one is like the little sisters of Yin and Yang school, who have no resistance to the pleasure of intimacy and only want to enjoy it. Telepathic finger is more to guide them to use their own power to dig out the source of happiness. The second one is religious fanatics like the Temple of Heaven monks. These people usually follow the precepts and often deliberately suppress their own desire, but they don't know that the more they suppress, the stronger the rebound. Wait a minute, just now, that ascetic monk who has never tasted the taste of meat is fine, but Moonless has countless beauties in her harem, a vassal lord of wine and forest of meat. Her. Wang Wu sneered and dismissively said, she is actually not as good as the ascetic monk. She seems extravagant, but she has always regarded herself as a political figure. Her every move has a strong purpose. Everything she does is superficial, and she has never enjoyed it from the bottom of her heart. People like her are actually stronger in suppressing their desire. Well, that makes sense. Therefore, telepathic finger is actually not a great skill. The name list I gave you was carefully selected. As long as you can capture them, my telepathic finger will be able to convert them to our faction. As long as there are enough people, we can seize power in one fell swoop at the general election. Wang Lu nodded and did not speak again. He just thought, not a great skill? If it was really that simple, the monks of the Temple of Heaven, who have been in political strife for thousands of years, would have already invented a similar method to unify the world. But, while thinking, he suddenly heard Wang Wu ask, after talking about me, it's my turn to ask you. Boy, I haven't seen you for a few months, you should have experienced a lot of things, right? Wang Lu's heart sank. Why did this guy suddenly ask about this? This is really a sensitive topic. I haven't figured out how to deal with this problem of my previous life, but you suddenly began to be aggressive. You, this master, are really considerate. Moreover, are you sure you want to know the truth? The next moment, he heard Wang Wu say in a heavy tone, however, without those experiences, I'm afraid you will not see me here. Wang Lu let out a sigh and suppressed the chaos in his heart. That's right, I can't always avoid this problem. I have experienced 150 years of wandering and returning to this land, so I can't turn a blind eye to everything in the past. And since she wants to talk, then let's talk about it. Before he finished speaking, Wang Lu found that his master's expression changed from heavy to playful. A man of indomitable spirit in the past, to be able to appear in this country of women, you must have suffered a lot down there. Wang Lu inwardly exclaimed, what the F***ck? The trace of emotion that had just brewed in his heart suddenly vanished. This sudden turn of events was simply intoxicating. While Wang Lu was still stiff, his master had come close to him, put her arm around his shoulder, and comforted him with gentle words, but being a woman is actually quite good. Losing a piercing death thorn spear is indeed a loss, but I can teach you telepathic finger. When you practice it to the highest level, you can use all 10 fingers at the same time and win by quantity, and it is not impossible to defeat the piercing death thorn spear. You have to think about it a little bit. Wang Lu could hardly restrain the urge to nail her to the wall with the piercing death thorn spear. Chapter 566. 3 days later. The plan to use the death thorn spear to nail his unscrupulous master to the wall was not put into practice. After all, the gap between the genius king pill cultivator and the number one king pill in 9 regions was too big. Moreover, it would take at least 20 to 30 years of cultivation before Wang Lu could officially overthrow his master's ghostly reign. Thinking to this point, Wang Lu quite regretted that when he was still Ouyang Shang, he had to be so generous to leave all his inheritance to Wang Wu alone, so that 150 years later, no one could control this woman. However, from another point of view, this was not necessarily a bad thing. With a person like Wang Wu close to him, it was undoubtedly able to remind and urge him to work hard in cultivation, so that he could nail her to the wall as soon as possible. As a means to stimulate cultivation, it was actually a good thing. In addition, Wang Wu's entrapment plan progressed very smoothly. 3 days later, all the harmonious heaven and open heaven level monks on the list were collected, and then one by one, they were turned into Sister Wu's subjects. Among them, 2 of the more powerful harmonious heaven level monks were personally captured by Wang Wu. One of them, Wang Lu, who was by her side, witnessed how the number one king pill in 9 regions, within 3 breaths of time, overwhelmed a cultivator equivalent to middle-level deity stage on the battlefield, captured and trained her to maturity. The whole thing made people feel relaxed and happy. Without any superfluous tricks, a full-strength counterattack of non-phase methods stunned the opponent, completely ignoring the huge difference between king pill and deity stage. When that harmonious heaven-level monk fell from the sky, Wang Lu simply could not understand that he and Wang Wu cultivated the same kind of method. Of course, what was even more refreshing was that Wang Wu chose the battlefield in the wilderness. Although there was no one coming and going, it was still in broad daylight. From the beginning to the end, the battle did not alarm anyone at all. Heavenly Earth was a world where the social structure was stable, and the Temple of Heaven controlled the overall situation. Small fights were fine, but once the war became intense, there was no reason for the Temple of Heaven not to discover the abnormality. And when one reached the deity stage, let alone fighting with others, in theory, even their every move should be included in the monitoring scope. After many years of improvement and development, the monitoring network carefully designed by the Temple of Heaven was full of loopholes under the efforts of the feudal vassal kings. Even if their own harmonious heaven-level monks were overturned, they would not be able to detect it, which was already amazing. Of course, an important reason for this was that the monitoring network of the Temple of Heaven, out of cost considerations, focused on the investigation after the incident. Only when someone reported the incident and confirmed the occurrence of the incident, would a large number of resources be invested in the investigation of the incident. Therefore, every time Wang Wu hunted a target, she would immediately subdue its mind and body with telepathic finger. No one would report the situation, and naturally, the Temple of Heaven would not be alarmed. At present, the resources have basically been integrated. Including Moonless, there are a total of 4 harmonious heaven-level monks and 15 open heaven-level monks in our camp, which is insignificant in the entire Temple of Heaven system. However, our competitor is not this huge organization, but the 7 Shintian-level high-level managers of the temple. Among these 7 people, even the most popular one can only control 10 harmonious heaven-level monks. Moreover, this relationship is more based on political considerations and interests, and their loyalty to each other is very limited. It is completely different from the monks who have been trained by telepathic finger. Therefore, now, even if we are an independent force, in theory, we also have the power to stir up the muddy water in the election. Inside the secret stronghold, Wang Wu put on a rare serious posture and analyzed the current situation for everyone with a serious look. Of course, it is far from enough to just stir up the situation, so the next step is to try to capture a Shintian-level candidate. In this way, through the confluence of the 2 forces, we can gain an overwhelming advantage in the election. And if the operation is good, we can even reach the sky in a single bound. Reach the sky in a single bound, is it that easy? Wang Lu asked. Of course it is not easy. The Temple of Heaven, as a bureaucratic religious institution, had increasingly strict class barriers. If a grassroots monk wanted to go all the way to the supreme heavenly level, it was bound to go through a long period of experience, and there were only a few cases where an exception was made. Even in the special period of the chaotic world's invasion and the outbreak of war, the election of the supreme leader of the Temple of Heaven was also particularly cautious. If Wang Wu tried to support a puppet to take the position, there was still some possibility. Although she would have to face great difficulties, it was too difficult to personally go into battle and reach the sky in a single bound. A stranger who had no foundation in the heavenly earth wanted to become the leader of the Temple of Heaven overnight. Where would the thousands of monks in the Temple of Heaven be placed? But since it was a religious organization, there would always be a shortcut to reach the Supreme. Ask the heaven. Wang Wu softly said her answer. Ask the heaven? The so-called ask the heaven is a means by which the Temple of Heaven will submit it to the heaven for disposal when it encounters a very major problem that cannot be decided by normal procedures. After listening to it, Wang Lu frowned. Submit it to the heaven for disposal? Is it a game like inviting the pen spirit? You can understand it that way. Tisk, after all, it's a fraud, but isn't the heaven they serve an impersonal existence? Where does it have the ability to deal with problems? Wang Wu said, it's true that there is an impersonal existence, but don't forget, according to the records of the Temple of Heaven, it was this impersonal existence that sublimated the heavenly earth from the chaos and selected the human immortals from the vast number of living beings to reproduce. Do you think this is really something that an impersonal God would do? Well, if it is really impersonal, then in theory, it will not take the initiative to do anything. However, for so many years, I have not heard of the Temple of Heaven implementing the procedure of Ask the Heaven. No, I have never heard of the saying of Ask the Heaven. The authority of Ask the Heaven is only open to a few people at the top level of the Temple of Heaven. If it is not a crisis related to the life and death of the Temple of Heaven and even the heavenly earth, who would bother an impersonal God? Moreover, every time the procedure is started, someone needs to pay a heavy price. A monk above Shintian level will lose most of her cultivation base. The Temple of Heaven has been established for thousands of years, and the number of times this procedure has actually been started is no more than 5, so it is normal that you did not know about it before. And once this procedure is started, it means that the God they serve will personally make a judgment, and this judgment naturally cannot be overturned by anyone. Hearing this, Wang Lu already understood. At the same time, the rules and regulations of the Temple of Heaven can only restrict themselves, but not the heaven. Therefore, even if the answer given by the heaven violates the teachings of the Temple of Heaven, it is the teachings that need to be changed, not the decision of the heaven that needs to be changed. In other words, if the result of Ask the Heaven shows that a newcomer named Wang Wu will inherit the position of heaven, then even if everyone is not convinced, they can only accept the reality for the time being, right? Yes, this is the ideal situation. Wang Lu said, 2 questions. First, are you sure that this procedure can be started if you want to? Second, how can you guarantee that the heaven will choose you? In fact, unless the heaven is blind, it will not choose its own people and choose you, an outsider. Wang Wu said with a smile, the first question is very simple. I don't need to care about the rules of the Temple of Heaven on the procedure of Ask the Heaven. In theory, it requires the consent of the Supreme Heaven and more than 4 Shintian-level monks to disturb the heaven with mundane matters. But this rule is actually meaningless, because the heaven does not care about these procedures. As long as there are monks above the Shintian level who sacrifice themselves and propose to communicate with the heaven, then the procedure of Ask the Heaven will be started. Then, even if I violate the rules of the temple, the final decision of the heaven is still not allowed to be violated. So it doesn't matter if I violate the rules. The second question is indeed the key, and also the focus of the next step of the work. According to the normal development, it is impossible for the heaven to choose me to be its spokesperson in the world, but I think this matter can be discussed. Talk. How do you want to talk? The first step is to try to get in touch with the heaven, and then try to negotiate to see how high the price tag is to let her choose me. If the negotiation doesn't work, then some violent means can also be considered. What a good idea, Sister Wu. Threatening and blackmailing the gods, this kind of plan was probably only thought of by Wang Wu. Of course, logically speaking, it did make sense, but in practice. Well, when you are punished by the heaven, I will remember to help you burn incense. Oh, who is incense? This joke is too cold. In short, it is a good idea to first figure out the details of the heaven. After all, only by knowing yourself and knowing your enemy can you win every battle. But the price of asking the heaven is huge, and once it is used, it will inevitably alarm the temple of heaven. Do you have any other way to contact the heaven? Wang Wu said with a smile, of course there is. In fact, almost everyone in the heavenly earth has a way to get in touch with the heaven. After all, this is completely different from letting the heaven make a decision on specific issues. Wang Lu's complexion changed slightly. You said that everyone knows the way. Do you mean the child bestowed by the heaven? It is the child bestowed by the heaven, a ceremony that everyone in the heavenly earth will experience. Unite with the beloved, and then ask the heaven to grant them a child. And the heaven will brew a new life for them according to the characteristics of the two people, which must be accompanied by the connection between people and the heaven. I understand the principle. The problem is. Wang Lu hesitated. Who are you going to do the child bestowing ceremony with? According to the rules, the ceremony of communicating with the heaven with the beloved was not a simple kowtow and prayer. When praying for the heaven to grant them a child, the two people needed to devote themselves wholeheartedly and unite, so that the heaven could feel the close bond between the two, and only then could they be granted the continuation of their bloodline. In short, there must be a real husband and wife. Upon hearing this, Wang Wu laughed and pointed her finger at Wang Lu. Do you still need to ask? Of course, it's you. And just when Wang Lu's hair stood on end, he saw Wang Wu point her finger behind him. It's your junior sister Luli, childish face, my favorite. Don't even think about it. Chapter 567. I think there is some misunderstanding between the two of us. Wang Wu said so. I didn't choose little Luli at random. I have a good reason. Wang Lu sneered. Yes, she's your favorite. Not to mention good reason, this reason is enough to make your blood boil. So this is a misunderstanding. To communicate with the heaven to carry out the child bestowing ceremony doesn't necessarily require a devout belief in the heaven, but the two people who carry out the ceremony must love each other wholeheartedly. If the feeling is not sincere enough, the heaven will ignore it. Wang Lu interrupted. You've just trained a large number of meat slaves who hold your leg and call you Sister Wu, so their feelings for you are absolutely sincere. Can't you just choose one of them? Of course not. How can their feelings be regarded as sincere? It's just that their minds are troubled by the primordial spirit skill and fall into a mental barrier. And my primordial spirit skill is bound to be ineffective in front of the heaven. Therefore, I can only choose from us, and among them, little Luli is the most likely to fall in love with me. Wang Lu sneered. With me here, do you think little Luli will fall in love with you? Wang Wu also sneered. So what if you're here? You think too highly of yourself. It's easy for me to win Luli's heart. With that, she took out a delicate food box from her mustard seed bag. Almost at the same time, Luli's eyes turned to her, blazing like fire. That food box was a takeaway gift box made by a famous divine chef in 9 regions. For the gluttons in the immortal cultivation world, it was a rare delicacy, so there was no need to mention its attraction to Luli. Wang Wu lifted the food box and proudly declared, See, I've got the true love from little Luli. You call this true love? Wang Lu shook his head. At most, this is seduction. Humph, I don't care how you want to define it. Even if little Luli's love for me is not passionate enough, I believe that in the ceremony, she will be enlightened by my telepathic finger and realize the happiness of being a woman, and then she will love me to death. In any case, this is the only way. You can't find anyone else to replace her. Wang Lu snorted. That's right. As for the others, big senior sister Zhu Shiyao didn't know what love was. All her passion was given to the immortal sword in her hand. Needless to say, Yu Xinyao was in the prime of her life. However, she and Wang Wu didn't have the slightest interaction, so naturally, there was no true love between them. As for Feng Ling, she indeed had a good relationship with Wang Wu, just like a sister. However, because of this, she could not be the object of the ritual. According to the doctrine of the Temple of Heaven, love between close relatives was not supported. Thus, in the end, it seemed that only Lu Li was feasible. But you still missed one person. Who? Wang Lu pointed at himself. Wang Wu was stunned. What do you mean? Wang Lu said coldly, didn't you want to use the child bestowment ceremony to contact the heavens of this world? I'll play with you. You? That's me. Wang Lu frowned. Is there anything you're not satisfied with? The ceremony requires the two people to really love each other. Wang Lu rolled up his sleeves and bared his teeth. Don't worry, in the past, I have learned from seventh uncle, so I can be considered as having a big tool and good skill. I guarantee that I can make you fall in love with me. As for whether you can make me fall in love with you, that depends on whether you're good enough. I say, Master, in any case, you're also a woman, don't tell me you can't do it in this aspect. Wang Wu angrily stomped her feet. You little bastard, you dare to question me? Just you wait, if I don't make you kneel down and beg for mercy, I won't be a woman anymore. Wang Lu sneered. Very well, then it's settled. I'll accompany you to play the child bestowment ceremony. During this period, you can't harass other people. At this time, Wang Wu's anger was slightly reduced. Upon hearing this, she was startled and realized that she seemed to have been deceived by her disciple. She could not help but sigh with emotion. You and I are master and disciple, why do you have to be so decisive? That makes sense. When the time comes, I will be a little gentler. Being provoked to this point, Wang Wu finally could not bear it anymore. Well, since you insist on doing things your own way, don't regret it when the time comes. The ceremony of the child bestowment ceremony should be very solemn. For the vast majority of people in the celestial world, this was a major ceremony that they had to experience at least once in their lives. Under the intimate union and sincere pleading, the children bestowed by the heavens would perfectly inherit the characteristics of the two lovers as the continuation of their lives. However, there were times of urgency in everything. For the child bestowment ceremony of Wang Wu and her disciple, there was no way to choose any auspicious date. 2 days later, the General Assembly of the Temple of Heaven would begin, and there was not much time left for them. The ceremony was set for the evening of the same day. The location was another private stronghold of Wang Wu. After this guy entered the immortal dream of heavenly earth, she fully displayed the characteristics of a cunning rabbit with 3 burrows and set up a number of private strongholds outside Sky City. The reason why she changed the stronghold was to get rid of Feng Ling and the others. For some reason, they were unusually enthusiastic about the child bestowment ceremony of Wang Wu and her disciple. Especially Feng Ling, who insisted on watching the whole process and recording it. No matter how the two people persuaded her, she would not listen. Therefore, they had no choice but to flee to another stronghold to avoid people's eyes and ears. Fortunately, this stronghold was actually in a sparsely populated barren mountain temple. Although it was remote, the sacrificial utensils and other props needed for the ceremony were all available. The two spent some time in the courtyard of the temple to set up and soon completed a simple ritual position. Then, they stood in the middle of the position and looked at each other in dismay. There was a long silence. Wang Wu smiled. It's not too late to regret. As he spoke, he rolled up his sleeves, revealing his snow-white wrists. Then, he smeared a sparkling and translucent lubricant on his hands. His gestures were professional, but when he moved his wrists and fingers, the crackling sounds made people shudder. In the face of the naked threat, Wang Lu also smiled. I'll say the same to you. If you admit defeat now, I won't laugh at you. With that, he took out 2 blue pills from his mustard seed bag and swallowed them. What the hell, what's that? Wang Wu was suddenly shocked. You actually took drugs. Wang Lu wiped his mouth. You think too much. Just now, those were just blueberry digestive pills. Blueberry. Do you think I'm Luli? How could you say such a stupid lie? What, are you afraid? Bah. Wang Wu said and took the initiative to take half a step forward, trying to look down at Wang Lu. However, when she walked in front of Wang Lu, she was surprised to find her disciple was already more than half a head taller than her. Wang Wu suddenly understood. So this guy has already grown so big? No, this question was too stupid. His growth curve did not suddenly rise recently. In terms of height, when he finished the body refining stage, he had already surpassed her. It was just that she had never felt that he was this tall. Was it because he had achieved the king pill? No, a mere king pill realm was not worth mentioning. Not to mention that he was only a king pill, even if he reached Yuanying stage, he was not qualified to be on equal footing with the number 1 king pill in 9 regions, let alone. Her momentary trance was soon interrupted because Wang Lu had keenly noticed that there were some changes in the surrounding atmosphere. The ritual that was previously arranged in the courtyard had begun to take effect, and the path of communication with the heaven was gradually formed. Okay, get ready to start. Wang Lu snapped, breaking his master's brief trance. However, when they came back to their senses, both of them had to face an awkward question. What should they do? In theory, both of them knew the following process, but when they actually did it, they felt that their limbs and bones were not listening to them. Hee, just now you said that you were domineering, why don't you dare to move now? Wang Wu felt that her hands were cold and stiff, so she took the first step to provoke him. Didn't you say that you have a big body? Let me open my eyes. Wang Lu calmly responded, even if you have a big body, you still have to be excited. Your appearance makes people not interested in you for a long time. Why don't you show me a little sincerity first? You want sincerity? That's easy. Wang Wu sneered and put her wet hand on her lapel. The glittering lubricant stained her chest, revealing half of the white skin hidden under the clothes. Wang Lu looked at her in surprise. He didn't expect this guy to actually have the courage to grab her lapel. This was the rhythm of naked. Although the master and disciple had lived together in non-phase peak for many years, and they had actually seen everything that should not be seen, but at this moment, it had a different meaning. Thinking of the graceful curve under the white clothes of the woman in front of him, Wang Lu slightly narrowed his eyes. The next moment, he saw Wang Wu's hand was completely inside her lapel, and then she took out a crystal stone from her bosom and activated it with her magical power. Suddenly, a burst of moaning sound rang, and the crystal stone reflected the scene of a man and a woman having sex. The rolling waves of flesh made people's blood boil. But Wang Lu was stunned. Your so-called sincerity is this thing? What, are you still not satisfied? This is one of the top 3 treasures in the Eastern Border region's Dark Hall list. The appearance and figure of both men and women are impeccable, and there are many tricks. What else do you want? Wang Wu smiled maliciously and said, don't tell me you just wanted to see something else. Do you think it's possible to communicate with the heaven with such a crystal stone? Then you do it, I'm at your mercy here. If you have the ability, just use it. Wang Wu very shamelessly kicked the ball back. F***ck, do you think I don't dare? Wang Lu also summoned up his courage, stepped forward, and then reached out to grab his master's lapel, almost face to face. At that moment, both of them felt each other's breath, and their bodies stiffened at the same time. After a moment of silence, Wang Lu suddenly asked, speaking of which, in order to see the heaven, isn't the price a bit big? If you say so, it is indeed. Wang Wu's voice, for some reason, sounded slightly trembling. This was because she suddenly felt a bit nervous. This nervousness came out of nowhere, and she was deeply confused. Nervous? It's not like we're going through a heavenly tribulation, it's just a mere Wang Lu. But, why do I feel that his figure looks vaguely familiar? Wang Lu said, you said that, according to the Divine Temple's ancient records, the child bestowment ceremony requires two people to combine their bodies and minds. What kind of combination is this? Probably. I'm in you, and you're in me. Then this should count. As Wang Lu spoke, he suddenly grabbed one of his master's hands, and then reached over to put a slender finger in his mouth. In that instant, Wang Wu's body trembled, as if a distant memory was about to be awakened. However, at that moment, a vast and enormous aura appeared in the sky, instantly stealing the two's attention. The heaven had arrived. Chapter 568. Before this, Wang Lu never thought that in this immortal dreamland, he would have the opportunity to face the heaven. According to the ancient records of the Temple of Heaven, mortals would never have the chance to see the heaven in their lifetime. The child bestowing ceremony did establish a connection with the heaven, but this connection channel was actually very small. For the inhabitants of the heavenly earth, if they wanted to face the infinite power of the heaven, apart from asking the heaven, which had not been used for thousands of years, they could only look forward to success in cultivation and ascend to immortality. In other words, it was almost impossible for the heaven to come down. At least, it would never really invite the heaven to come down to the mortal world just because of the child bestowing ceremony. However, in front of the fact, no matter how many impossibilities there were, it was meaningless. The huge pressure on top of his head caused Wang Lu's jade mansion to shake and his primordial spirit to be in a trance. Just the sense of the existence of the heaven was like a substance oppressing him, making him unable to move. Under the suppression of the heaven, all the reverie vanished. Even when his primordial spirit was in a trance, it was impossible to form any clear thoughts. The charming atmosphere from a moment ago was gone, and the power of the heaven shone in all directions. However, a moment later, the huge pressure disappeared. Wang Lu's mind suddenly became clear, and then he spat out a mouthful of turbid air from his chest. However, he saw that there was a layer of pale golden light curtain above his head. His master raised one hand to the sky, and her two sword fingers bloomed with light, isolating the huge pressure outside. Non-phase sword defense. Wang Lu did not even have time to sigh with emotion. The onion sprout-like finger that he just put in his mouth, at this time, could actually proudly resist the heaven collapse. He immediately called out the sword of Mount Kun and poured all his power into it, ready to fight. Although he did not understand the reason, the hostility from the heaven was undoubtedly clear. Such a huge pressure was by no means normal. As a member of the Plentiful City Management Committee, Wang Lu had seen a lot of supreme-level powerhouses over the years. Although he could not talk and laugh with them, he would never be shocked by their eyes. Because the reason was very simple. This thing, pressure, could be withdrawn and released at will. Otherwise, how could those supreme who stood at the peak of the immortal path go out? With their cultivation, if they didn't restrain their strength, they would cause landslides and the earth to crack wherever they went. As for the heaven in this immortal dreamland, Wang Lu did not think that it was more powerful than those peak supremes in 9 regions. At least, it would not be this much stronger. Therefore, this huge pressure could only mean that the other party did not come with good intentions. Looks like my speculation is correct. Impersonation is just a gimmick. The so-called firmament is just a cultivator with an extremely high cultivation base and patience. Wang Wu said, "Humph, I never believed in heaven from the beginning. How could a group of self-proclaimed Dixian people create heaven in the immortal dreamland? What a joke." Wang Lu nodded lightly. This belated statement is pretty good. You still have the nerve to make sarcastic remarks behind my back? Wang Wu angrily glared at him. I think this change is mostly your fault. Wang Lu declined to comment. After a moment of silence, he gave his master a wink. Wang Wu smiled and opened a tiny gap in her non-phase sword defense. A gray sword chi rushed out from the gap and went straight to the sky. That was Wang Lu's all-out primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi. After accumulating power for a long time, coupled with the guidance and amplification of the sword of Mount Kun, the power of this sword strike had far exceeded the king pill stage. However, the sword she dragon only wandered in the air for a breath of time before it was crushed into powder by an even more powerful force. However, Wang Lu was not discouraged. With his Jin Dan stage cultivation, being able to last for a breath of time in front of the heaven was already something that he could be proud of. Not to mention that his sword strike was originally just a greeting. This is the first time we meet, yet you're already so hostile. Dare I ask the heaven, what is the reason for this? After the sword she dragon shot out, Wang Lu let out a loud and clear roar. A moment later, there was a rumbling sound of thunder in the sky, which was the answer given by the heaven. Being able to directly talk to the other party, the purpose of his sword strike had been achieved. However, when Wang Lu heard this, he couldn't help but gawk. Men, none of them are good. What kind of words is this? Well, it's not that incomprehensible. In this immortal dreamland, men were set as the chaotic species of the lower realm, which could be called the source of all ugliness and disasters. And the heavenly earth's heaven was the creator of this pure land of women, so naturally, it was full of discrimination against the chaotic species of the lower realm. However, when it opened its mouth, it actually said such a sentence, which was really shocking. But then he heard Wang Wu nod and say, "These words are deep in my heart, men are indeed not good." Wang Lu was ready to refute this sexist point of view, but then he saw his master winking at him, seemingly implying something. Based on decades of, plus Ouyang Shang's life, and nearly 100 years of tacit understanding with each other, Wang Lu instantly understood her intention. When the heaven came, it couldn't be resisted. Wang Wu's non-phase sword defense could block it for a while, but it couldn't block it forever, and the root of the problem was obviously the word man. This cultivator, who was regarded as the heaven, hated all men in the world to the extreme. Wang Lu opened the child bestowing ceremony as a man, which was like hitting the muzzle of a gun. But on the other hand, what if Wang Lu was not a man? For example, if the stellar fairy Wang Lulu was here, would the heavens still come in anger? While Wang Lu was silent, Wang Wu continued to try to give him a hint. She silently gestured with her other free hand, "Quickly cut it, it's not too late." Wang Lu gave her a middle finger and also made the same gesture, "Cut your ass." Wang Wu was also anxious and directly said, "Can you at least think about me? Right now, I'm supporting the non-phase sword defense against the heaven. I can't hold it for long. It's fine if you don't care about your own face, but do you want to put me in danger for your own little organ?" Wang Lu was also anxious. "How dare you slander the spear of death as a little organ?" Wang Wu sneered and no longer paid him any attention. She turned her head and shouted at the heaven, "Hey! At least I'm innocent. She's a real cute girl, okay? Later, I'll release my sword defense, and you can crush him to death. Please let me go." As a result, the next moment, the heaven directly struck Wang Wu's head, and the pale golden sword defense shook for a while. Wang Wu looked up at the sky in disbelief. "What the hell, why did you hit me?" The heaven responded with a thunderous voice, "A woman who falls in love with a man also deserves to die." Ha 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 ha. Wang Lu suddenly laughed wildly. Seeing countless thunder snakes moving in the sky, after laughing, Wang Lu immediately argued loudly, "The love between a man and a woman is not a sin, heaven, you must have misunderstood." The thunder continued to roll. There are indeed many scum in the world, and the love between a man and a woman often leads people to go to extremes and into depravity. But nothing is absolute. Are there no scum among women? Is the love between a woman and a woman pure and dirty? Even in this paradise, blessed by the heaven and carefully selected descendants of the human immortals, there are still all kinds of sins. It can be seen that gender discrimination and even misophobia are not desirable. What's more, the love between a man and a woman is too numerous to mention. If you don't believe me, I can tell you the story of the ancient sword strange story. Before he finished speaking, an unprecedentedly fierce thunder struck toward Wang Lu. Wang Lu very keenly predicted this attack and stood next to Wang Wu in advance to divert the trouble. Wang Wu took the attack with great difficulty. After blocking the thunder, she shouted at the top of her lungs, "Heaven, please investigate. I definitely didn't fall in love with him, I like women." But before she finished speaking, because of the trembling of her body, a crystal that she had just put away rolled out of her arms and onto the ground. As the crystal rolled, it was stimulated by the surging magic power and instantly shook. Then, it released images and sounds. A pair of naked man and woman were having sex crazily. The scene was in full swing. At that moment, Wang Lu and Wang Wu stared at the crystal on the ground in shock, not knowing what to say. The so-called "heaven wants me dead" was probably referring to the current situation. For a moment, the world was silent, and only the moans of the man and woman in the crystal could be heard. Shameless. Boom. The next moment, the thunder from the sky became twice as thick, hitting Wang Wu's right hand that was supporting the sword defense until it became numb. But after the situation became 100 times more serious, Wang Wu seemed to be much calmer. She raised her left hand to stabilize the sword defense and said to Wang Lu, "After so much acting, how's the analysis going?" After the arrival of heaven, most of the discrimination between the master and disciple was deliberate acting. Of course, there was also a small part where they were scolding each other with their true feelings. They wanted to create all kinds of extreme situations to observe each other's reactions. Wang Wu needed to use all her strength to maintain the sword defense, so the responsibility of analysis fell on Wang Lu's shoulders. Wang Lu nodded and sneered, "The so-called heaven is just a stubborn little girl with a low EQ. She's just a little stronger, but she's only at the level of a normal Dixian. There's nothing great about her. Can you not be so condescending when you're at the level of a normal Dixian? It makes people think that your level is very high. Humph, at least compared to Zhong Xingming, this guy is still far behind." Thinking of the battle of wits and courage with the sword demon in the ancient sword tomb, this so-called heaven really didn't know what to say. "I've probably seen some clues. Is it the divine thunder from the sky?" "No problem, I'll help you. Let's do it together." Wang Lu said, took a few steps forward, went behind Wang Wu, and then gently hugged her. This ambiguous action, at this time, seemed very solemn. Because at the same time, there were two king pills echoing each other. Wang Wu felt a warm force pouring into her jade mansion, and her non-phase sword defense, which was on the verge of a crisis, suddenly received a powerful support. Wang Lu's strength alone was insignificant in front of the divine thunder from the sky. However, that king pill was, after all, the top-quality king pill in the world. When it fell into the hands of Wang Wu, the room for it to play was too big. The difference between the 110th layer cultivation method and Wang Lu's 60 to 70 layer cultivation method was really like the difference between heaven and earth. Fusion was power. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.